Welcome back, guys. This is Potter Fanfic Hub. Here we explore powerful Harry Potter what-if stories. What if Harry Potter unleashed his inner Slytherin and shook the wizarding world? If you enjoy epic magical videos, subscribe to Potter Fanfic Hub. Now, let the story begin. Chapter 1, The Serpent Within. The cupboard under the stairs had no windows. Harry Potter had long ago stopped counting the days by the light that never reached him. Instead, he counted by the sounds, the creak of the floorboards above telling him when the Dursleys woke, the clatter of Vernon's shoes on the linoleum, the high, sharp tone of Petunia's voice calling for Dudley's breakfast. He counted by the smell of bacon drifting through the cracks, by the way the house settled into silence after they left for school and work, and by the weight of the darkness that pressed against his eyelids when he tried to sleep. He was small for his age. The Dursleys made sure of that, not through any conscious effort to starve him, but through a system of neglect so complete that it had become second nature to everyone in the house, including Harry himself. He had learned to make his portions last, to eat slowly, to stretch a single slice of toast into a meal that would carry him through a day of chores. The cupboard had become his world. Not a prison, exactly. Prisons had doors that locked from the outside, and Harry's door only had a bolt that he'd long ago learned to work from the inside. No, the cupboard was something worse. It was a place of forgetting. A place where the Dursleys could pretend he didn't exist, and where Harry had learned to make himself small enough to fit into the spaces they left for him. But small didn't mean weak. That was the first lesson Harry learned, though he didn't have words for it at the time. He was 4 years old when Dudley had cornered him in the garden, pudgy fists raised, demanding Harry's only toy, a broken soldier that Harry had found in the gutter. Harry had given it over without a fight. He'd watched Dudley stomp it into the dirt, then walked back to the house with his hands in his pockets and his face carefully blank. That night, lying in his cupboard, Harry had replayed the moment in his mind. He'd seen the way Dudley's eyes had lit up at the sight of Harry's fear. He'd seen the way Petunia had smiled from the kitchen window, watching her son triumph over the freak. And he'd realized something that would shape the rest of his childhood: showing his feelings was the same as handing someone a weapon. After that, Harry began to watch. He watched the way Vernon's face tightened when he was about to explode, the vein in his temple that pulsed like a warning siren. He watched the way Petunia's fingers twitched toward the nearest object when she was nervous: a teacup, a dishcloth, anything she could grip to steady herself. He watched Dudley's moods like a weather system, learning to read the subtle shifts in his cousin's expression that preceded a tantrum. More than that, Harry watched the world outside. Through the sliver of window at the top of the cupboard door, he could see the street beyond the Dursleys' front garden. He watched the postman's routine, the timing of the milk delivery, the way the neighbors came and went. He catalogued everything: patterns, habits, the small rhythms of ordinary life that the Dursleys never noticed. He didn't know why he did this, not at first. It was just something that happened, like breathing. But by the time he was 6, Harry understood: knowledge was safety. The more he knew about the world around him, the more he could predict, the less likely he was to be caught off guard. It was the summer he turned 7 that Harry discovered another truth about himself. He'd been in the kitchen, washing dishes, his hands raw and red from the hot water, when Dudley had come barreling through with a toy broomstick, swinging it like a club. Harry had seen it coming. He'd seen the way Dudley's eyes had focused on him, the way his cousin's body had tensed with anticipation. Harry had braced himself for the impact, knowing from experience that there was nothing he could do to stop it. But the broomstick never hit him. Instead, something had happened, something Harry couldn't explain. The broomstick had stopped in midair, an inch from his face. Dudley's face had gone from vicious triumph to confusion to terror in the span of a heartbeat. And then the broomstick had flown backward, slamming into Dudley's chest and sending him sprawling onto the kitchen floor. Harry had stood there, frozen, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He hadn't done anything. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't even flinched. And yet somehow, impossibly, the broomstick had moved. Petunia had appeared in the doorway, her face white, her hands trembling around a dishcloth. She'd looked at Dudley on the floor, at Harry standing over him with his wet hands and his terrified eyes, and she'd known. Harry could see it in her face, the same expression she always got when something strange happened around him. The same expression that said freak. That night, Harry lay in his cupboard and thought about what had happened. He replayed the moment over and over, trying to understand. He hadn't wanted the broomstick to hit him, that much was obvious. But he also hadn't wanted it to hurt Dudley. He just wanted it to stop. Wanted the danger to go away. And it had. Harry didn't know how, but he'd made it happen. He'd wanted something, and the world had bent to his will. It was a terrifying realization. And, Harry discovered, it was also a liberating one. For the next 3 years, Harry practiced in secret. He didn't have a name for what he was doing, he'd never heard the word magic, except as a curse word from Vernon's mouth. But he knew that something strange lived inside him, something that responded to his will, and he wanted to understand it. The first thing he learned was that it didn't work when he was angry or scared. Emotions made it unpredictable, sloppy. When Dudley's friends chased him through the playground, his panic had caused a fire alarm to go off in the school, but that was chaos, not control. Harry wanted control. So he trained himself to be calm. To breathe through his fear, to push his anger down into a small, dark place where it couldn't interfere. He practiced in the cupboard at night, focusing his mind on simple things, making the dust motes dance in the sliver of light from the hall, making his blanket settle more comfortably around his shoulders. It was slow. Painfully slow. Some nights, nothing happened at all, and Harry would lie in the darkness, wondering if he'd imagined the whole thing. But other nights, the dust motes would swirl like tiny galaxies, or the blanket would shift as if moved by an invisible hand. And each small success built on the last. By the time he was 9, Harry had learned to direct his will with precision. He could make small objects move without touching them, though it left him exhausted afterward. He could warm himself on cold nights without shivering, which was useful since the Dursleys often forgot to turn on the heating in his cupboard. He could even, on rare occasions, make himself invisible for a few seconds at a time, not truly invisible, but somehow less noticeable, less present in the world. This last ability had proven particularly useful. Harry had discovered it by accident one day when he'd been caught snooping in the living room. He'd wanted to see the television, which Vernon kept strictly off limits to him. When Vernon had stormed in, red-faced and furious, Harry had felt himself shrink back, had willed himself to disappear. And Vernon had looked right through him. Had scanned the room, cursed under his breath, and left. Harry had stayed frozen in place for a full hour, barely breathing, until he'd been absolutely certain Vernon wasn't coming back. After that, Harry had refined the technique. He could fade into the background of any room, become so unremarkable that people's eyes slid over him without registering his presence. The Dursleys' neighbors never noticed the small boy in the garden. Shopkeepers forgot they'd served him. Even Petunia, who hated him most, could be convinced to overlook him if he tried hard enough. It wasn't disappearing. It was more like becoming irrelevant. Being exactly what everyone expected him to be, nothing, nobody, no one worth noticing. And in that invisibility, Harry found freedom. He began to explore. Not physically, he couldn't leave the house, not without Vernon's permission, but mentally. He read everything he could get his hands on, devouring books from the school library and even, on rare occasions, sneaking into Dudley's room to steal the textbooks his cousin had abandoned. Harry learned geography, history, mathematics. He learned about the way the world worked, about electricity and evolution and the vast sweep of human civilization. But he also learned something else. He learned that the ordinary world didn't make sense. That something was wrong with the picture the Dursleys presented, something that didn't add up. It started with the letters. Harry was 11 the first time he saw his name on an envelope. It was a Tuesday morning, and he was in the kitchen making breakfast, eggs and bacon for Dudley, toast for himself, when the post arrived. He'd heard the thump of mail through the letterbox and had gone to collect it, as he always did. And there it was. A letter. Thick, cream-colored envelope, no stamp, addressed to Mr. H. Potter, The Cupboard Under the Stairs, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Harry had stood in the hallway, his heart hammering in his chest, and stared at it. His name. His name, right there on the envelope, in elegant green ink. And the address, The Cupboard Under the Stairs. No one knew about the cupboard. No one. He'd hidden the letter under his shirt and slipped back into the kitchen before the Dursleys had noticed. All that day, as he scrubbed pots and weeded the garden and made Dudley's bed, the letter had burned against his skin. He'd wanted to open it, to see what was inside, but something had stopped him. Some instinct that said this was important, this was precious, this needed to be done right. At night, safely locked in his cupboard, Harry had finally opened it. The letter was written on parchment, not paper, and the handwriting was elaborate, almost decorative. It read: Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore. Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Source, CHF, Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, International Confede, of Wizards. Dear Mr. Potter. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment, Term begins on September 1st. We await your owl by no later than July 31, Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall. Deputy Headmistress. Harry had read the letter 3 times, the words swimming before his eyes. Witchcraft. Wizardry. Hogwarts. None of it made any sense, and yet, at the same time, it made perfect sense. The strange things that happened around him. The broomstick. The dust motes. The way he could make himself invisible. It had a name. It was witchcraft. The Dursleys, of course, had tried to stop him. The next morning, the letters had multiplied, first a dozen, then 100, then so many that they'd filled the house like a flood. Harry had watched Vernon's face grow redder and redder, had seen the terror in Petunia's eyes, had listened as they'd moved from house to house, finally ending up on a bleak, rock-strewn island in the middle of nowhere. And that's when it had happened. The giant who called himself Hagrid had broken down the door, and Harry had learned the truth about his parents, about the magical world, about Voldemort and the curse that had failed to kill him. Hagrid had told him that he was a wizard, that he was famous, that there was a whole world out there waiting for him. And Harry had listened carefully. He'd smiled in the right places, asked the right questions, done his best to seem like the eager, overwhelmed boy they expected him to be. But inside, something else was happening. Something cold and calculating that had been growing for years, nurtured in the darkness of his cupboard. The Dursleys had hidden the truth from him. All his life, they'd pretended he was a freak, a burden, a mistake. They'd made him small so they could feel big. They'd kept him ignorant so they could keep him powerless. Harry had accepted that, once. He'd accepted it because he hadn't known any different. But now he knew. He knew there was a world where he mattered, where his name meant something, where people had loved his parents and mourned their deaths. He knew that the Dursleys' cruelty was just a pathetic attempt to deny what they couldn't understand. And Harry made a decision. He would never be powerless again. He would go to Hogwarts, would learn everything he could, would become the wizard he was meant to be. But he would do it on his terms. He would be careful. He would be patient. He would keep his head down and his eyes open, just like he'd done in Privet Drive, and he would learn. The magical world thought he was a hero, a savior, a boy who triumphed over evil through luck and destiny. They expected him to be grateful, humble, overwhelmed by their attention. Harry let them think that. He let Hagrid ruffle his hair and talk about his parents, let the old man think he was just a poor, lonely boy who'd finally found his place in the world. But as he stood on the Hogwarts Express, looking out at the rolling green hills of Scotland, Harry felt something stir inside him. Not magic, not the accidental, uncontrollable force that had lived in him since childhood. Something else. Something sharper. Something that whispered in the back of his mind about the games adults played, the lies they told, the power they hoarded. He hadn't had a name for it before. He'd just called it survival. But now, watching the magical world unfold before him, Harry understood what it really was. It was ambition. And he intended to use it. The ride to Hogwarts was an education in itself. Harry had known, intellectually, that the magical world was different from the one he'd grown up in. But seeing it, the children in robes, the owls fluttering through the corridor, the trolley which selling chocolate frogs and pumpkin pasties, was something else entirely. It was overwhelming. And overwhelming meant dangerous. Harry sat in a compartment with another first year, a pale, nervous boy named Neville who kept losing his toad. He made polite conversation, nodded at the right moments, and tried to look as out of his depth as the other boy clearly was. But while Neville fretted about the sorting ceremony, about what his grandmother would say if he disappointed her, Harry was cataloguing the trolley which had mentioned that the train had been charmed to keep non-magical people from noticing it. That meant there were spells for hiding things, for making them invisible to ordinary eyes. Useful. The other students spoke of families, pure-blood families, half-blood families, muggle-born families. There were hierarchies here, just like at Privet Drive, just like everywhere. The trick would be figuring out where he fit in them. And the sorting ceremony. Harry had asked Neville about it, and the boy had stammered something about the houses, about Gryffindor and Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw and Slytherin. Gryffindor was brave, Neville had said. Hufflepuff was loyal. Ravenclaw was smart. And Slytherin. Neville had shuddered at Slytherin. Said it was for dark wizards, for the ones who'd followed you-know-who. Said his grandmother had told him to stay away from them. Harry had nodded, made agreeable noises, and filed the information away. Because here was the thing about survival, it required seeing past what people told you. The Dursleys had told him he was worthless, and he'd learned to value himself. The magical world was telling him Slytherin was evil, and Harry knew enough to doubt it. He'd seen how the wizarding world worked. He'd heard Hagrid talk about his parents, about how they'd been betrayed by someone they trusted. He'd heard about the Death Eaters, about Voldemort, about the war. The magical world had its villains, sure. But it also had its politics, its prejudices, its casual cruelties. And Harry had learned one thing better than anything else: don't trust the story they tell you. Look for the story they're trying to hide. The Sorting Hat had an old song, a rhyme about the houses and their virtues. Gryffindor valued courage, Hufflepuff valued loyalty, Ravenclaw valued wisdom, and Slytherin valued ambition. The hat sang of cunning and greatness, of shrewdness and strength. And as it sang, Harry watched the other students, the older ones, the ones who'd been through this before. He saw the way they tensed when the hat mentioned Slytherin. Saw the way the tables whispered among themselves, the glances thrown at the green and silver banner. He saw fear. He saw contempt. He saw everything the magical world thought it knew about the house that had produced so many dark wizards. But Harry also saw something else. He saw the Slytherins themselves, the older ones watching the ceremony with sharp, assessing eyes. They weren't afraid. They were calculating. They were measuring each new student, weighing their worth, deciding who would be useful and who would be dismissed. In other words, they were doing exactly what Harry had been doing his whole life. The sorting was alphabetical, which meant Harry was somewhere in the middle. He watched as students went up one by one, as the hat was placed on their heads and they were sent to one house or another. He watched the cheers and applause, the disappointed faces, the proud smiles. He learned the rhythms of the ceremony, the expectations placed on each student. And when it was his turn, when the entire great hall went silent and the whispers began, "Potter, Harry Potter, the boy who lived," Harry walked to the stool with his head held high and his face carefully composed. He'd practiced this face for years. It was the face he'd worn when Vernon yelled at him, when Dudley hit him, when Petunia looked at him with hatred in her eyes. It was the face of a boy who had nothing to hide because he had nothing at all. The hat descended over his eyes, plunging him into darkness. And then a voice spoke in his mind, old and dry and amused. "Difficult. Very difficult. I can see the courage, plenty of it. And the intelligence, oh, yes, you're not stupid, are you? But there's something else. Something you've been hiding for a long time." Harry didn't speak. He'd learned not to speak when he didn't know what to say. "There's ambition here. A hunger for power. A desire to prove yourself, to rise above the people who've held you down. That's not Gryffindor, not really. Courage is part of it, yes, but it's not the whole story. You want to build something. You want to be something. You want to shape the world." The hat paused. Harry felt its words settling into him, confirming what he'd been feeling since he'd left Privet Drive. "You could be great, you know. The path is open to you. But you have to choose it. Not everyone would understand the choice you're making. Not everyone would approve." Harry thought of the Dursleys. He thought of the way they tried to keep him small, to make him forget who he was. He thought of the way the magical world looked at him, saw him as a hero or a victim or a symbol. He thought of what he'd decided on that train, watching the Scottish hills roll by. He wasn't going to be small anymore. He wasn't going to be a symbol. He was going to be himself. Whatever that meant. "I will not be a pawn," Harry said silently, knowing the hat could hear him. "I will not be anyone's tool. If I'm going to survive in this world, I need to be strong. Not just powerful. Strong enough to make my own choices." "Ah," the hat said. "Then you know what I'm about to say." "Yes," Harry said. "I do." "Are you sure?" "There's no going back, once it's done. And I don't mean the house I choose for you. I mean the path you're choosing. The path of the serpent." Harry didn't hesitate. "I'm sure." The hat was silent for a moment. Then, in a voice that only Harry could hear, it whispered, "Then it is Slytherin." It wasn't a choice the hat had made. It was a choice Harry had made for himself. The cheering from the Slytherin table was polite, measured. They clapped for him, of course, the boy who lived, the famous Harry Potter, choosing their house. But Harry could see the calculation in their eyes, the weighing and measuring. They were looking at him, assessing him, wondering what he was worth. He met their gazes one by one, not flinching, not backing down. He was the smallest one in the room, the youngest, the newest. But he'd been small before. He'd been the smallest in the Dursleys' house, the lowest on the pecking order. And he'd learned to survive. At the Gryffindor table, he saw faces filled with shock and disappointment. Ron Weasley, who he'd met on the train, was staring at him as if he'd been betrayed. Hermione Granger, the bushy-haired girl who'd been sorted into Gryffindor, was whispering frantically to the students next to her. Harry knew what they were thinking. They'd wanted him to be something. A Gryffindor hero, someone who fit the narrative they'd been told. He wasn't going to fit anyone's narrative anymore. The head table was harder to read. Dumbledore, the headmaster, was watching him with eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. There was a slight frown on the old wizard's face, a crease between his brows. That spoke of worry rather than disapproval. Harry noted that. Filed it away. And Professor Snape. Harry recognized him from Hagrid's description, the potions master, the one who'd been a Death Eater, the one who supposedly hated Harry's father. Snape was staring at him with an expression Harry couldn't decipher. It wasn't hatred, exactly. It was something else. Something complicated. Harry wondered why Snape was looking at him like that. He filed that away too. The feast was elaborate, the food appearing on golden plates as if by magic. Harry ate sparingly, even though he was starving. He'd learned that lesson too: never let them see your hunger. Never let them see what you need, because that gives them power over you. His housemate spoke to him carefully, testing his boundaries. A pale, handsome boy named Draco Malfoy had introduced himself with an air of entitlement that Harry immediately recognized as insecurity. Draco was the son of a wealthy, powerful family, and he'd clearly never been told no. Harry would have to be careful with him. Not too friendly, not too distant. A useful ally, if handled correctly. There were others, a girl named Pansy Parkinson who watched him with sharp, possessive eyes, and another boy, Blaise Zabini, who seemed content to observe. The conversation was pleasant, superficial. They asked him about his childhood, about his parents. Harry gave them the story they expected. I didn't know I was a wizard, I grew up with muggles, it's all been very overwhelming. It wasn't entirely a lie. He had been overwhelmed, at first. But he'd learned to channel that overwhelm into something more useful. Something colder. The feast ended, and the prefects led them through the castle to the Slytherin common room. The journey itself was an education, the moving staircases, the portraits that talked to each other, the eerie sensation of walking through walls. Harry watched everything, catalogued everything, memorized the route. The common room was beneath the lake, or so the prefects said. Green light filtered through the windows, casting everything in an underwater glow. The furniture was dark wood and green velvet, rich and elegant and slightly sinister. It was beautiful. It was also a trap, Harry realized. A beautiful, comfortable trap designed to make you forget that you were below ground, beneath the water, cut off from the world above. He filed that away too. His dormitory was lavish by the standards of Privet Drive. A four-poster bed, heavy curtains, a trunk at the foot. Harry sat on the edge of the bed and looked around at the other boys, Malfoy, Zabini, and two others he didn't know yet. They were talking among themselves, comparing families and connections, and Harry knew he would have to learn to navigate these waters. But not tonight. Tonight, he was tired. Not just physically tired, he'd barely slept for days, but emotionally drained. The weight of everything he'd learned, everything he'd decided, pressed down on him like a physical thing. He lay back on the bed and closed his eyes, listening to the soft murmur of voices around him. The Slytherins were settling in, establishing their hierarchies, their alliances. Harry could feel them watching him, even now, even with his eyes closed. They were waiting to see what he would do. How he would behave. What he would reveal. He wasn't going to reveal anything. He would be patient. He would be careful. He would learn everything there was to learn about this world, the same way he'd learned about Privet Drive. And when the time came, when he knew enough, he would make his move. He didn't know what that move would be, not yet. He didn't know what he wanted, not really. All he knew was that he was done being small. Done being invisible. Done being a pawn in someone else's game. He fell asleep to the sound of the lake water lapping against the castle walls, and in his dreams, he was a serpent swimming through dark water, patient and cold and waiting. The weeks that followed were a careful dance. Harry attended classes, did his homework, and learned the rhythms of Hogwarts. He was careful not to excel too obviously, not to draw too much attention. He'd learned at Privet Drive that being exceptional was dangerous, it made people jealous, suspicious, eager to tear you down. But he also couldn't afford to be mediocre. That would have been even more dangerous, would have made him seem weak, worthless. So Harry found a balance. He was good enough to be respected, not good enough to be feared. He was friendly enough to be included, not friendly enough to be trusted. Potions was the most difficult. Professor Snape seemed to have a personal vendetta against him, singling him out for criticism at every opportunity. Harry had expected this, thanks to Hagrid's warning, but the reality was worse than he'd imagined. Snape didn't just dislike him, he seemed to hate him with a cold, focused intensity that took Harry's breath away. But Harry had dealt with hatred before. The Dursleys had hated him, and he'd survived. Snape was just another enemy to be managed, another danger to be navigated. He responded to Snape's barbs with quiet politeness, never rising to the bait, never showing emotion. It drove the professor crazy, Harry could tell. Snape wanted a reaction, a sign of weakness, something to confirm his low opinion of Harry. But Harry refused to give it to him. He also refused to show his anger. He'd learned that anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. It clouded his judgment, made him careless, gave away his position. So he pushed it down, into the same dark place where he'd been pushing his emotions for years. It was easier than it should have been. Maybe that was the Slytherin part of him, the part that the hat had sensed. Maybe it was just survival. Either way, it served him well. Defense against the dark arts was a different story. Professor Quirrell was a stuttering mess, clearly terrified of his own subject. The students made fun of him behind his back, and Harry had to admit there was something pathetic about the man. But there was also something off. Something that didn't quite fit. Harry watched Quirrell more carefully than he watched the other professors. There was something hidden in the man's fear, something that seemed to be watching Harry right back. It was a feeling he'd learned to trust, the same feeling that had told him Vernon was about to explode or that Dudley was planning something cruel. So Harry kept an eye on Quirrell. He kept an eye on everyone, really. The castle was full of secrets, and Harry intended to learn them all. His classmates were another challenge. The Slytherins were cautiously accepting of him, but Harry could feel the distance between them. They'd accepted him as one of their own, but he was still an outsider, the famous Harry Potter, the boy who'd somehow ended up in their house. They didn't trust him. Not yet. That was fine. Harry was patient. He'd spent years earning the trust of people who didn't want to trust him. He could do it again. Malfoy was the most obvious potential ally. The boy was clearly hungry for friendship, eager to attach himself to someone with Harry's name and fame. Harry allowed the friendship to develop, but he was careful not to seem too eager. Malfoy had to think the friendship was his idea, his project. The other Slytherins fell into place around them. Parkinson, Zabini, and the others. They formed a group, a protective circle around Harry that kept the other houses at a distance. It was exactly what he needed, a shield against the curious glances, the whispered questions, the pressure to perform. But Harry didn't let himself become dependent on them. He still spent time alone, exploring the castle, learning its secrets. He discovered the Room of Requirement early on, though he didn't know its name or its rules. It was just a room that appeared when he needed it, a place to think, to practice, to be alone with his thoughts. And his thoughts were turning darker. He couldn't help it. The more he learned about the magical world, the more he saw its flaws. The blood purism, the class divisions, the casual cruelty of children who'd been raised to believe they were better than others. It was a world that had failed his parents, that had let them die, that had sent him to live with the Dursleys without any explanation or support. Harry didn't know who to blame for his parents' deaths. Voldemort, obviously. But there were others who'd failed them, Dumbledore, the Order, the Ministry of Magic. The whole system was rotten, and Harry wanted to tear it down. But he wasn't stupid. He knew he was just a first year, a child, no one important. He couldn't change the world yet. He had to learn first, had to grow stronger, had to understand how the game was played. So he watched. He waited. He learned. And in his dreams, the serpent swam deeper, always deeper, into the dark water where the ancient powers waited. It was Halloween that changed everything. Harry had been at Hogwarts for 2 months, had established his position, had begun to feel comfortable in his new life. And then, in the middle of the feast, Professor Quirrell had burst in with news of a troll in the dungeons. The chaos that followed was an education in itself. Harry saw how people reacted to fear, the panic, the selfishness, the instinct to save themselves first. He saw it in the teachers, in the students, in the way the prefects tried to maintain order. He filed it all away. And then he remembered, Hermione Granger was in the bathroom. She'd been crying there earlier, and no one had told her about the troll. Harry didn't go to save her out of heroism. He went because it was the logical thing to do. Hermione was smart, potentially useful, and she'd be grateful if he helped her. Gratitude was a currency he could spend later. The troll was larger than Harry had expected, a lumbering mountain of muscle and anger. It was already in the bathroom when he arrived, smashing the stalls to pieces. Hermione was cowering in the corner, and Harry knew he had to act. He'd been practicing his magic, of course. But he couldn't do anything flashy, not here, not now. He needed to be clever. "Hey," he shouted, waving his arms. "Over here, you ugly brute." The troll turned, its small eyes focusing on him. Harry dodged the first swing of its club, and in that moment, he saw something, the troll's nose. It was the only vulnerable spot, the only place where a lucky hit might do some good. "Wingardium Leviosa," he shouted, pointing his wand at the club. It wasn't a spell he'd practiced, but he'd seen Hermione cast it, and he understood the principle. The club rose into the air, wobbling, and Harry directed it toward the troll's head. It hit the troll square in the face, and the beast crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. Hermione was staring at him. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, and she looked like she'd just seen something impossible. You saved me," she stammered. Harry shrugged. "You would have done the same." It wasn't true, and he knew it. Hermione would have saved him, but for different reasons. She was brave, genuinely brave, the kind of person who rushed in without thinking. Harry had rushed in too, but he'd been thinking. He'd been calculating. He'd known exactly what he was doing. That was the difference between them. That was the difference between him and every Gryffindor in the castle. When the teachers arrived, Harry was ready. He told them he'd followed Ron into the bathroom, Ron, who'd accompanied him, who'd frozen in terror and let Harry take the lead. It was a good story, plausible, easy to believe. Ron backed him up, and the teachers accepted it. Hermione didn't contradict them. She looked at Harry with something new in her eyes, a kind of understanding. She knew what he'd done, and she knew why. She just didn't know what to do with that knowledge. Later, in the common room, Harry thought about what he'd learned. He'd faced a troll and survived. He'd saved someone's life. He'd built a bond that might be useful later. It was a good night's work. But there was something else, something darker. In the chaos of the feast, Harry had seen something in Professor Quirrell's eyes. Something that had made his blood run cold. Quirrell was not what he seemed. Harry had suspected it before, but now he was certain. There was something hidden in that man, something that watched Harry with a hunger that was almost physical. Harry didn't know what it was. He didn't know how to fight it. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he needed to be ready. He needed to be stronger, smarter, more prepared than anyone expected. He needed to be a serpent in the grass, waiting for the right moment to strike. The rest of the year passed in a blur of classes and conflicts. Harry made his way through the curriculum, always keeping one eye on the bigger picture. He learned potion making, even though Snape made it miserable. He learned transfiguration, even though it was frustratingly difficult. He learned everything he could, as quickly as he could. But his real education was happening outside the classroom. In the library, reading about the history of magic. In the common room, listening to the older Slytherins discuss politics and power. In the room of requirement, practicing the spells that the teachers didn't think he was ready for. He was learning. He was growing. And somewhere deep inside him, the serpent was waking up. It was mid-spring when Harry discovered the journals. They were hidden in a secret room behind a tapestry on the third floor, a place he'd found by accident when he was fleeing from Mrs. Norris. Inside, there were dozens of books, ancient, dusty, covered in strange symbols. Harry didn't know whose they were. There was no name, no identification. But as he read through them, he realized they were something special. They were journals. Someone's personal journals, filled with notes and observations about magic that Harry had never heard of. The writer was anonymous, but Harry could tell he was brilliant. He described spells that hadn't been used in centuries, theories about magic that went beyond anything the Hogwarts curriculum offered. He spoke of power, of ambition, of the desire to push beyond the boundaries of ordinary wizardry. Harry read those journals with a hunger that surprised him. He felt like he was peering into the mind of someone who understood him, someone who shared his desire for something more. The writer was a Slytherin, Harry realized. Of course he was. The ambition, the careful planning, the willingness to question everything, it all pointed to the House of Serpents. But there was something else, too. Something darker. The writer spoke of blood purity, of the ancient families, of the need to preserve the old ways. There were passages that made Harry uncomfortable, that hinted at a worldview he didn't share. Still, he read on. He was smart enough to separate the useful information from the ideology. He could learn from this writer's brilliance without adopting his prejudices. The journals became his secret, his obsession. He spent hours in the hidden room, reading by wandlight, absorbing everything he could. The writer had discovered things about magic that no one else seemed to know, how to strengthen magical cores, how to create protective wards, how to use intention and will to shape spells in ways that went beyond the standard incantations. Harry practiced these techniques in the room of requirement. He learned to push his magic in ways he'd never imagined, to control it with precision, to let his will shape reality. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and addictive. He was becoming powerful. He knew it, felt it in the way his spells responded to him, in the way his magic hummed beneath his skin. He was no longer just surviving. He was thriving. And yet, there was always more. The journals hinted at deeper secrets, older powers, things that the writer had never fully explored. Harry was determined to find them. He didn't know what he was looking for. Not yet. But he knew he'd recognize it when he found it. The last day of term arrived before Harry was ready. He'd accomplished so much, learned so much, but there was still so much left to do. He packed his trunk with a heavy heart, knowing he'd be returning to Privet Drive, to the Dursleys, to the small cupboard under the stairs. But he wasn't the same boy who'd left Privet Drive. He was stronger, smarter, more powerful. He had plans. He had ambitions. He was the heir of something old and something new, the serpent who'd chosen to shed his skin. He stood on the platform at King's Cross, watching the steam rise from the Hogwarts Express. The other students were laughing, hugging, promising to write. Harry was alone in the crowd, even though Malfoy and the other Slytherins were nearby. He'd learned that this was the nature of power, it made you separate, distinct, different from the masses. But Harry didn't mind being different. He'd been different his whole life. The cupboard under the stairs had taught him that. He boarded the train and found a compartment. He sat by the window, watching the Scottish countryside roll by, and thought about the year ahead. He would return to Hogwarts in the fall. He would continue his training. He would unlock the secrets of the journals. He would become stronger, smarter, more powerful than anyone expected. And when the time was right, he would strike. The serpent was awake. And it was hungry. Chapter 2, The Choice of Ambition. The summer at Privet Drive was a lesson in patience. Harry had expected it to be unbearable, the return to the cupboard, the endless chores, the Dursleys' carefully maintained fiction that he didn't exist. And it was unbearable, in its way. But Harry had changed. The cupboard was smaller now, the walls pressing in on him. In ways they never had before. He'd grown accustomed to space, to light, to the vast stone corridors of Hogwarts. The narrow darkness of his childhood home felt like a cage. But cages, Harry had learned, were only prisons if you let them be. He'd brought his school things home, of course, the trunk with his robes and books, the wand that had chosen him at Ollivander's. But he'd also brought something else, the journals he'd found in the hidden room. He'd copied them by hand before leaving, spending the last weeks of term in a fever of transcription. The originals were too dangerous to bring home, too precious to risk, but the copies were safe in his trunk, hidden beneath a false bottom he'd charmed himself. The charm was clumsy, a first-year's attempt at concealment, but it would do. The Dursleys never went near his things anyway. They preferred to pretend he didn't exist. Harry spent his days doing chores and his nights reading by wandlight, the thin glow of his magic the only illumination in the darkness of his cupboard. He'd learned to shield the light, to keep it from seeping through the cracks in the door. The Dursleys would have noticed, would have asked questions, and Harry didn't want to answer questions. Not yet. Not until he was ready. The journals were more than just magical texts. They were a window into a mind that thought the way Harry thought, cold, calculating, endlessly ambitious. The writer, whoever he was, had understood something that Harry was only beginning to grasp, that magic wasn't just about spells and potions. It was about will. About intention. About the fundamental desire to reshape reality according to your own design. The wand is a focus, one passage read, but the true instrument of magic is the mind. Those who rely on incantations and gestures are like children playing with toys. The master of magic needs no wand. He needs only his will. Harry had read that passage a dozen times, trying to understand it. He could feel the truth. In it, could sense the deeper magic that the writer was describing. But he wasn't ready for it, not yet. His will was strong, but it wasn't that strong. He still needed the wand, still needed the incantations. But he was getting there. He practiced every night, pushing the boundaries of what he could do. He levitated objects without speaking, transfiguring them with a thought. He learned to shield his mind, to make it a fortress that no one could breach. He learned to sense the magic in others, to feel the ebb and flow of power that surrounded every living thing. It was exhausting work, and sometimes Harry woke in the morning feeling like he hadn't slept at all. But it was worth it. Every small success was a step closer to his goal. He didn't know what his goal was, not exactly. It was more of a feeling, a sense that he was meant for something greater, something beyond the ordinary life of a wizard. He would go back to Hogwarts, would continue his studies, would become the wizard he was meant to be. But that was just the beginning. The journals hinted at other things, ancient magic, forgotten powers, secrets that had been buried for centuries. Harry intended to find them all. But first, he had to survive the summer. The Dursleys were their usual selves. Vernon had grown redder in the face and more terrible in his rages, if that was possible. Petunia was thinner and more pinched, her eyes always darting toward Harry as if expecting him to explode. Dudley had ballooned to impossible proportions, his face a perpetual expression of sullen greed. They'd heard about the magical world, of course. Hagrid's visit had been a revelation, and not a welcome one. They'd tried to pretend it hadn't happened, to go back to their ordinary lives, but the knowledge was like a splinter in their minds, a constant irritation they couldn't ignore. Harry found it amusing, in a cold sort of way. They'd spent years trying to stamp out the magic in him, trying to make him ordinary. And now, they knew, beyond any doubt, that he was anything but ordinary. They knew he belonged to a world they couldn't understand, couldn't control. They were afraid of him. Harry had known that for a while, had seen it in the way Petunia flinched when he entered a room, in the way Vernon's voice went shrill when he shouted. But this summer, the fear was different. It was sharper, more desperate. They knew he was going back to Hogwarts in the fall, back to the world of magic. And they knew there was nothing they could do to stop him. So they did what they'd always done, they pretended. They pretended Harry didn't exist. They pretended the magic was a bad dream, a fever that would pass. They went about their lives as if nothing had changed, as if the strange, dangerous boy in the cupboard was just a nuisance they had to tolerate. Harry let them pretend. It was easier that way. He'd learned long ago that the Dursleys were at their most dangerous when they were forced to confront the truth. As long as they could maintain their fiction, they were manageable. And Harry had things to do. He spent his free hours exploring the neighborhood, learning its secrets. He'd been walking these streets for years, but he'd never really seen them before. Now, with his newfound magical senses, he could feel the subtle currents of power that ran through everything. The ley lines, the journals called them. Ancient pathways of magic that flowed beneath the surface of the world. There was one near Privet Drive, a thin, weak line of power that Harry could sense if he concentrated. It wasn't much, nothing like the powerful currents that ran through Hogwarts, but it was enough. Harry practiced tapping into it, drawing on its energy to fuel his experiments. He was careful, always careful. He couldn't afford to be discovered, couldn't afford to draw attention. So he worked in secret, in the shadows, never revealing what he was doing. By the time August arrived, Harry had made significant progress. He could cast simple spells without speaking. He could shield his mind against intrusion. He could sense the magical signature of other beings, could tell when someone was lying to him. He was ready. Almost. But there was still more to learn. The journals had told him about the wizarding world, about its politics and its power structures. But they'd also told him about his family. The Potters were an old family, the journals said. Not as old as some, the Malfoys, the Blacks, the Lestranges, but old enough to have accumulated wealth and influence over the centuries. Harry's parents had been wealthy, had left him a vault at Gringotts that Hagrid had shown him. But the journals spoke of other things too, things Hagrid hadn't mentioned. The Potters had once been powerful, influential. They'd been respected in the wizarding community, had held seats on the Wisengamot and positions at the ministry. But they'd fallen from grace, the journals said. They'd allied themselves with Dumbledore, with the Order of the Phoenix, and that alliance had cost them everything. Harry read those passages with a growing sense of unease. Dumbledore had been his parents' ally, had been the one to place him with the Dursleys. And yet the journals painted a picture of the old wizard that was far from flattering. Dumbledore is a chess master, one entry read, and he sees all of us as pieces. He plays the long game, sacrificing pawns for the sake of the larger strategy. Those who trust him learn too late that they were never more than assets. Harry thought about that. He thought about Hagrid, who'd been sent to fetch him on Dumbledore's orders. He thought about the letter, the careful wording, the way everything had been orchestrated to make him feel welcomed into the magical world. He thought about the Sorting Hat, and how it had whispered to him about greatness. About the path of the serpent. About the choices he was making. Had Dumbledore known? Had he expected Harry to choose Gryffindor? To follow in his parents' footsteps? Had he been surprised when Harry chose Slytherin instead? Harry didn't know. But he was beginning to suspect that Dumbledore was not the benevolent grandfather figure he pretended to be. The old wizard had his own agenda, his own plans. And Harry was just a piece on his board. A piece that was starting to move on its own. The letters started arriving in late July. Harry knew they were coming, of course. He'd received the first one, the real one, the one that had changed his life, on his 11th birthday. Now, a year later, he was expecting the second. But he wasn't expecting them to be delivered by Owl. The first one came on a Tuesday morning, just as the Dursleys were sitting down to breakfast. Harry was in the kitchen, scrambling eggs, when a large tawny owl swooped through the open window and dropped an envelope on the table. Vernon screamed. Petunia fainted. Dudley looked at the owl with a mixture of fear and fascination. Harry calmly picked up the envelope and opened it. It was his Hogwarts letter, of course, confirming his place for the second year and listing the required books and equipment. Nothing to worry about, he said mildly, folding the letter and tucking it into his pocket. Just my school things. But Vernon wasn't listening. He was staring at the owl, which had perched on the back of a chair and was regarding them with a distinctly judgmental expression. "Get it out," Vernon whispered, his face pale beneath its usual redness. "Get it out of my house." "I can't control the owls," Harry said, which was a lie. He'd learned to control animals, to some extent, with the techniques from the journals. But it was easier to let Vernon think he was helpless. "They just come. Probably more on the way." He was right. Over the next few days, a steady stream of owls descended on Privet Drive, each one carrying a letter or a package for Harry. He received his school list, a note from Hermione Granger, a letter from Ron Weasley, and several advertisements from various magical shops. Vernon tried to stop them, of course. He boarded up the windows, blocked the chimney, set traps for the birds. But the owls were relentless, finding their way into the house through every crack and crevice. By the end of the week, Harry had a pile of correspondence on his bed. He read through it all carefully, filing away every piece of information. Hermione's letter was full of news about her summer holiday, her parents, her excitement about returning to Hogwarts. Ron's was mostly complaints about his brothers, his mother, the general awfulness of being the youngest son in a large family. Harry wrote back to both of them, careful to keep his letters cheerful and ordinary. He didn't mention the journals. He didn't mention his experiments. He kept his secrets close. But there was one letter that stood out from the rest. It was from the Hogwarts librarian, a formal notice that the restricted section would be open for research on certain days during the summer term. Harry had used the restricted section extensively during his first year, had read every book he could get his hands on. But this letter was different. It was addressed directly to him, and it was signed by the librarian herself. "Mr. Potter," it read, "I have noticed your interest in the more advanced texts in our collection. I would like to invite you to a private research session during the upcoming summer holiday. Please let me know if you are interested." Harry read the letter 3 times, trying to understand it. Why would the librarian be interested in him? Why would she offer him private access to the library's most restricted texts? There was something here, something he wasn't seeing. But Harry had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts told him that this was an opportunity. A chance to learn more, to gain access to knowledge he couldn't get anywhere else. He wrote back, accepting the invitation. The letter also contained instructions for getting to Hogwarts during the summer. There were special port keys, Harry learned, that could transport him directly to the castle gates. All he had to do was be at a certain place at a certain time. It was the perfect excuse to escape Privet Drive. The day of his departure, Harry woke early and packed his trunk. He'd been careful to keep his magical supplies hidden, but now he brought them out, placing them carefully in his luggage. The journals were in a hidden compartment, safe from prying eyes. His wand was tucked into his pocket, ready for use. He said nothing to the Dursleys. Let them wonder where he was. Let them imagine all sorts of terrible things, each one worse than the last. He left through the back door, walking down the garden path toward the shed where he'd been told to wait. The port key was a broken teapot, sitting on a shelf in the corner. Harry touched it, felt the familiar hook behind his navel, and was sucked away. He landed on the grass in front of Hogwarts, the castle rising before him in all its splendor. It was a beautiful sight, even in the grey light of a summer morning. The turrets and battlements stretched toward the sky, and Harry could feel the magic humming beneath his feet like a living thing. The librarian was waiting for him at the entrance. She was a tall, severe woman, dressed in dark green robes that matched the color of the Slytherin crest. Her name was Madame Pants, and she had a reputation for being harsh and unforgiving. "Mr. Potter," she said, her voice clipped and precise. "Welcome. I trust your journey was uneventful." "Thank you, Madame Pants," Harry said. "It was. Good. Follow me." She led him through the castle, past the familiar corridors and staircases, toward the library. Harry had been in the Hogwarts library dozens of times, but he'd never seen it like this, empty, silent, echoing with the ghosts of old stories. Madame Pants didn't take him to the main reading room. Instead, she led him through a labyrinth of shelves, past books that seemed to whisper as they passed, to a small room tucked away in the back. It was lined with bookshelves, and there was a desk in the center with a single candle burning on it. "This is the restricted collection," Madame Pants said, gesturing around the room. "The books that are too dangerous, too precious, or too rare to be kept in the main library. You may access it while you are here." Harry looked around the room, his heart pounding with excitement. There were thousands of books here, each one filled with secrets he couldn't wait to uncover. But Madame Pants wasn't finished. "There are conditions," she said. "You may read anything you like, but you may not remove any of these books from this room. You may not make copies of any pages. And you may not tell anyone about what you find here." "Of course," Harry said, his voice steady despite his excitement. "Good." Madame Pants nodded. "I'll leave you to it. I'll return at sunset." She left, and Harry was alone. He took a moment to savor the silence. Then he began to explore. The restricted collection was a treasure trove. Harry found books on ancient magic, on dark arts, on the hidden history of the wizarding world. He found books on potion making that went far beyond what Snape taught in class. He found books on transfiguration, on charms, on the fundamental nature of magic itself. But there was one book that caught his attention. It was old, bound in black leather, and it had no title on its spine. When Harry opened it, he found a name inscribed on the first page. Salazar Slytherin. His heart stopped. Salazar Slytherin, the founder of his house, the legendary wizard whose name had become synonymous with dark magic. Harry had heard the stories, of course. Every Slytherin had heard them. But this was something else. This was the man's own words, his own thoughts, his own secrets. Harry began to read. The book was a journal, just like the ones he'd found in the hidden room. But this one was older, more powerful. Salazar Slytherin had written it in the early days of Hogwarts, when the founders were still building the school. He'd filled it with his theories on magic, his beliefs about purity, his plans for the future. Harry read greedily, devouring every word. Slytherin was brilliant, there was no doubt about that. His understanding of magic was far beyond anything Harry had ever encountered. And his ambition, his ruthless, boundless ambition, spoke to something deep inside Harry. But there was something else too. Something darker. Slytherin had believed in blood purity, in the superiority of wizarding families. He distrusted Muggleborns, had seen them as a threat to the magical world. His writings were filled with contempt for those he considered lesser. Harry read those passages carefully, trying to understand. He didn't agree with Slytherin's prejudices, he'd been raised by Muggles, after all, had seen the best and worst of them. But he understood where Slytherin was coming from. The fear of the other, the desire to preserve what was precious, the unwillingness to trust outsiders. It was fear. All of it was fear. And Harry knew something about fear. He'd spent his childhood in its grip, had let it shape him, control him. But he'd learned to overcome it. He'd learned to turn his fear into something else, into caution, into preparation, into power. Slytherin had done the same. He'd taken his fear of the unknown and turned it into a philosophy. A worldview. A legacy that had lasted for 1,000 years. Harry didn't agree with that legacy. But he respected its power. He spent the day in the restricted collection, reading everything he could. He learned about the founding of Hogwarts, about the battles between the founders, about the secrets they'd buried beneath the castle. He learned about the Chamber of Secrets, the legendary chamber that Slytherin had built, though the book didn't say where it was. He learned about Parseltongue, the language of serpents, and how Slytherin had passed it down to his descendants. Harry wondered if he had that ability. He'd never spoken to a snake, had never felt the urge to. But the possibility was intriguing. He read about magical artifacts, about the power of blood, about the nature of the soul. It was overwhelming, dizzying, and Harry had to force himself to slow down, to absorb what he was reading. By the time the sun set, Harry had filled 3 pages of notes. He'd marked passages he wanted to return to, spells he wanted to try, theories he wanted to explore. The restricted collection was everything he'd hoped for and more. Madame Pants returned at sunset, just as promised. She led him out of the library and back to the entrance of the castle. "You may return tomorrow," she said. "I'll be here at the same time." "Thank you," Harry said. "I appreciate this." Madame Pants nodded. "You're a curious boy, Mr. Potter. That's a good quality, in a wizard. Just be careful what you find. Not every truth is meant to be uncovered." Harry left the castle with those words echoing in his mind. Not every truth is meant to be uncovered. But Harry intended to uncover them all. He returned to Privet Drive that night, tired but exhilarated. The Dursleys were in bed, and the house was quiet. Harry slipped through the back door, past his cupboard, and up to his room, the small spare bedroom that Petunia had grudgingly allowed him to use. He sat on the bed and looked at his notes. Salazar Slytherin's journal had opened his eyes to a world of possibilities. The Chamber of Secrets, the hidden magic, the ancient powers that slept beneath the castle. Harry had always known that Hogwarts was special. But now he understood just how special it was. The castle was built on a foundation of power, a network of magic that had been growing for 1,000 years. And Harry was going to access that power, one way or another. He fell asleep with Slytherins. Words echoing in his mind. When he woke, he was more determined than ever. The rest of the summer passed in a blur of research and preparation. Harry visited Hogwarts every week, spending his days in the restricted collection and his nights practicing what he'd learned. He was growing stronger, more skilled, more powerful. But he was also growing more distant. He'd always been apart from his classmates, always an outsider. Now that distance was widening. The Slytherins didn't know what he was doing, didn't know about the journals or the research. They just knew that Harry was different, that he was holding something back. It was fine. Harry didn't need them to understand. He needed them to be useful, to provide the cover and support he needed to pursue his real goals. And he had other things to think about. The restricted collection had given him a new understanding of the magical world, of its history and its politics. He was beginning to see the patterns, to understand how the game was played. The wizarding world was divided, the journals said. Divided between the old families and the new, between the purebloods and the half-bloods, between those who wanted to preserve the old ways and those who wanted to change everything. Voldemort had exploited those divisions, had used them to build his power. He'd promised the purebloods a return to the old days, a world where their power and privilege were unquestioned. And they'd followed him, those who were hungry enough, greedy enough, fearful enough. But Voldemort was dead. And his followers were scattered, defeated. The old families had retreated back into their mansions, licking their wounds, waiting for the next opportunity. Harry saw an opportunity. He didn't know what he wanted, not exactly. But he knew he wanted more than the wizarding world was offering him. He wanted power, influence, control. He wanted to be the one making the decisions, the one shaping the future. And he was willing to do whatever it took to get there. The day before the Hogwarts Express departed, Harry received another letter. This one was from Gringotts, the Wizarding Bank, informing him that his vault had been audited and that several new items had been added to his inheritance. Harry had known he was wealthy, of course. Hagrid had shown him the vault, had told him about his parents' estate. But this was different. This was something new. He visited Gringotts the next morning, traveling by flow powder from the leaky cauldron. The goblins at the bank were cold and unfriendly, but they were efficient. They led him to his vault and showed him what had been added. There were books, ancient, precious books that had belonged to his parents. There were artifacts, the invisibility cloak that had been his father's, a mirror that showed him his heart's desire, a diary that had belonged to his mother. Harry took it all, storing it carefully in the enchanted trunk he'd been given. He read through the books that night, learning about his parents' lives, their friends, their enemies. He learned about the war, about the Order of the Phoenix, about the people who had fought and died to stop Voldemort. It was a lot to take in. Harry felt a strange mix of emotions, pride in his parents' courage, anger at the world that had taken them from him, determination to make sure their sacrifice meant something. He would not let them down. He would not let Voldemort's legacy continue. He would make a world where his parents' deaths were not meaningless, where the darkness they'd fought against was finally defeated. And he would do it his way, on his terms. The Hogwarts Express was crowded, as always. Harry found a compartment near the back, away from the chaos. He didn't want to deal with the other students, didn't want to answer their questions or listen to their gossip. He needed to think. But the solitude didn't last. The door slid open, and a familiar face appeared, Hermione Granger. "Harry," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "I was hoping to find you. How was your summer?" "Fine," Harry said. "Yours?" "Brilliant. I read so many books, you wouldn't believe it. And I've been practicing my spells, I want to be ready for the new year." Harry smiled. Hermione was a good person, genuinely good. She didn't have a hidden agenda, didn't play games. She was exactly what she seemed, and Harry found that both refreshing and slightly unsettling. "Can I sit with you?" she asked. "Of course." She settled into the seat across from him, her arms full of books. She began talking about her summer, her parents, her excitement about returning to Hogwarts. Harry listened, nodded in the right places, and kept his thoughts to himself. But he was watching her, studying her. Hermione was brilliant, the smartest student in their year. She could be useful, Harry knew. She could help him with his research, with his plans. But she was also loyal to Dumbledore, to the Order. She believed in the old ways, in the goodness of the world. She would never understand what Harry was trying to do. He filed that information away and kept talking. The train arrived at Hogwarts in the evening. The sky was dark, the stars beginning to appear. Harry looked out the window at the castle, lit up against the night, and felt the familiar surge of excitement. He was home. The feast was the same as always, the sorting of the new students, the welcoming speech from Dumbledore, the endless array of magical food. Harry sat with the Slytherins, eating mechanically, thinking about what lay ahead. He had a plan now. A real plan. He was going to access the Chamber of Secrets, find Salazar Slytherin's hidden magic, and use it to build his power. He was going to learn everything there was to know about the ancient magic, the secret arts, the powers that had been buried for 1,000 years. He was going to become the greatest wizard who ever lived. The serpent was awake, and it was ready to strike. After the feast, the prefects led them to the common room. Harry followed, his mind still churning with plans. He barely noticed the stone corridors, the familiar portraits, the password that opened the entrance to Slytherin's domain. The common room was the same as always, dark, green, underwater. Harry sat in his usual corner and watched his housemates. They were talking, laughing, catching up on the summer. They didn't notice him watching, didn't realize he was cataloging every word, every gesture. He knew them all now. Draco Malfoy, the rich boy with the powerful father. Blaise Zabini, the cool observer. Pansy Parkinson, the gossip queen. And the others, the hangers-on, the sycophants, the ones who would follow anyone with enough power. Harry had been building his power all summer. Now it was time to use it. He waited until the common room was nearly empty, then stood up and walked toward the door. He had things to do, plans to make. The Chamber of Secrets was waiting, and Harry intended to find it. Harry. Draco's voice stopped him. "Where are you going?" "Just for a walk," Harry said. "Can't sleep." Draco nodded, but there was something in his eyes, a suspicion, a curiosity. He knew Harry was hiding something, and he wanted to know what it was. Harry smiled. "Don't worry, Draco. I'll be back soon." He left the common room and walked through the corridors, heading toward the library. He didn't need a map now, he knew the castle as well as he knew his cupboard. Every secret passage, every hidden room, every whispering ghost. But he was looking for something new. Something that had been hidden for 1,000 years. The Chamber of Secrets. Harry didn't know exactly where it was. The journals had been vague, hinting at a location without revealing it. But Harry had his clues. The entrance was near a snake, in the dungeons, somewhere beneath the castle. He'd been searching for weeks, ever since he'd read Salazar Slytherin's journal. But he hadn't found anything yet. Tonight. He was determined to change that. He walked through the dark corridors, his wand glowing with a soft light. He listened for the sounds of the castle, the creaking of the walls, the whispering of the portraits, the distant howling of the wind. But he didn't hear what he was looking for. He walked for hours, exploring every nook and cranny. He found passages he'd never seen before, rooms that had been sealed for centuries. But no chamber of secrets. Finally, exhausted, Harry sat down on the floor and closed his eyes. He thought about Salazar Slytherin, about the legacy he'd left behind. He thought about the magic that slept beneath the castle, waiting to be awakened. And then he heard it. A voice, whispering in his ear. A voice that spoke in a language he couldn't understand, but somehow knew. "Open," it said. "Open the way." Harry opened his eyes. He was in a corridor he didn't recognize, lined with stone pillars. And at the end of the corridor, he saw it, a door, covered in ancient markings, with a serpent's head carved above it. The voice spoke again. "Open." Harry walked toward the door, his heart pounding. He reached out and touched the serpent's head, feeling the cold stone beneath his fingers. And then, without thinking, he spoke. The words came out of him like a hiss, a language he'd never learned but somehow understood. And as he spoke, the door began to open. Harry stepped through, into the darkness beyond, and knew that his life would never be the same. Chapter 3, The Serpent's Rise. The darkness beyond the door was absolute. Harry stood in the threshold, his wand raised, the faint glow from its tip barely penetrating the blackness ahead. He could feel the magic here, old, powerful, humming with an energy that made his skin prickle. This was the Chamber of Secrets, or at least the entrance to it. The journals had been right. It was real. He took a step forward, then another. The door slid shut behind him with a soft thud, and Harry felt a moment of panic before he suppressed it. He was alone, underground, in a place that hadn't been opened in centuries. If anything went wrong, no one would know where to find him. But fear was a luxury Harry couldn't afford. He'd learned that lesson years ago, in the cupboard under the stairs. Fear clouded judgment, slowed reaction, made you weak. He pushed it down, into the same dark place where he kept all his unwanted emotions. The corridor stretched on, descending deeper beneath the castle. The walls were damp, covered in a strange green moss that seemed to glow faintly. Harry could hear water dripping somewhere ahead, a steady rhythm that echoed through the silence. He walked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The corridor twisted and turned, branching off into smaller passages that Harry ignored. He was following the pull of the magic, the same instinct that had led him to this door in the first place. Finally, the corridor opened up into a vast chamber. Harry stopped at the entrance, his breath catching in his throat. The room was enormous, easily the size of the Great Hall. High above, the ceiling was lost in darkness, but Harry could see columns rising up into the shadows, each one carved with the image of a serpent. The walls were lined with more serpents, their stone eyes seeming to watch him as he entered. And in the center of the chamber, there was a statue. It was massive, easily 50 feet tall, carved from the same dark stone as the walls. The figure was that of a wizard, old and severe, with a long beard and flowing robes. In one hand, he held a staff, in the other, a serpent coiled around his arm. Salazar Slytherin. Harry walked toward the statue, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. He felt small here, insignificant, like an ant crawling through the ruins of a giant's world. But he didn't feel afraid. He felt something else, awe, perhaps, or reverence. This was the legacy of his house, the founder who had shaped the destiny of generations. "Welcome," a voice said. Harry spun around, his wand raised. But there was no one there. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the chamber like a whisper from the past. "I have been waiting for you, heir of Slytherin." Harry's heart was pounding, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Who are you?" he asked. "Show yourself." "I am what remains of Salazar Slytherin," the voice said. "A memory, a fragment, preserved in this place for 1,000 years. I have been waiting for one of my blood to find this chamber." "I'm not of your blood," Harry said. "Not exactly. I'm a descendant of the Peverils, but—" "Your blood carries my legacy," the voice interrupted. "The Parseltongue, the ambition, the hunger for power. You are my heir in all the ways that matter." Harry felt a strange warmth in his chest, a feeling that was almost like pride. He was the heir of Salazar Slytherin, the most powerful wizard of his age. That meant something. It meant he was destined for greatness. But he didn't let the warmth cloud his judgment. He'd learned to be suspicious of easy answers, of flattery that came too freely. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Nothing," the voice said. "I am a memory, nothing more. But I can offer you something, knowledge. Power. The secrets that have been lost for 1,000 years." Harry thought about it. He was in a dangerous place, alone, with no one to help him if something went wrong. But the promise of power, of ancient secrets, was too tempting to resist. "What kind of secrets?" he asked. "All of them," the voice said. "The magic of the old world, the power that was lost when wizards became afraid of their own strength. I can teach you things that no living wizard knows. I can make you the greatest sorcerer of your age." Harry didn't hesitate. "Teach me." The voice laughed, a dry, rustling sound like dead leaves. "Good. I knew you were the right one." The next few hours were a revelation. The memory of Salazar Slytherin taught Harry about magic he'd never imagined, blood magic, soul magic, the ancient arts that had been banned for centuries. He learned about the power of intention, of will, of the desire that drove all magic. "You don't need a wand," the voice said. "Wands are a crutch, a limitation imposed by the weak to keep the powerful in check. True magic comes from within, from the strength of your will and the clarity of your purpose." Harry listened, absorbing everything. He'd always felt that magic was about more than just waving a wand and saying the right words. Now he understood why. The wand was a focus, a tool, but it wasn't the source of power. The source was inside him, waiting to be unlocked. He spent hours in the chamber, practicing the techniques Slytherin taught him. He learned to feel the magic flowing through his body, to direct it with his thoughts, to shape it with his will. It was difficult, exhausting work, but Harry pushed through, determined to master it. By the time he finally left the chamber, he was drained but exhilarated. He'd made progress, real progress. He could feel the power inside him, waiting to be unleashed. But he also knew he wasn't ready, not yet. There was so much more to learn, so much more to master. The Chamber of Secrets was a treasure trove of knowledge, and Harry intended to use it. He returned to the Slytherin common room just before dawn, slipping through the entrance without being seen. The common room was empty, the fire burned low, and Harry collapsed onto one of the sofas, exhausted but triumphant. He was the heir of Slytherin. The power of the ancient world was at his fingertips. And no one knew. The weeks that followed were a careful balancing act. Harry attended classes, did his homework, and maintained the facade of an ordinary student. But at night, he returned to the Chamber of Secrets, learning the secrets that Salazar Slytherin had left behind. He grew stronger, more powerful. His spells became more precise, his control more absolute. He could cast without speaking, without waving his wand. He could feel the magic around him, could sense the intentions of others. But he had to be careful. If anyone discovered what he was doing, everything would be ruined. The teachers would confiscate his notes, seal the chamber, put a stop to his training. He couldn't let that happen. So Harry was careful. He kept his head down, didn't draw attention to himself. He was friendly enough with his classmates, but never too friendly. He participated in class, but never excelled too obviously. He was the perfect Slytherin, clever, ambitious, but unremarkable on the surface. But the surface was all anyone saw. His housemates began to notice him, to see the potential he was hiding. Draco Malfoy in particular was fascinated by Harry, following him around like a shadow, trying to figure out what made him tick. "You're different," Draco said one afternoon in the common room. "I can't put my finger on it, but you're different." Harry looked up from his book, keeping his expression neutral. "Different how?" "I don't know." Draco frowned. "You're more focused. Like you're thinking about something all the time." "What are you thinking about, Potter?" "Nothing," Harry said. "I'm just trying to get through my homework." Draco laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Homework. Right. You're the boy who lived, and you're worried about homework." Harry shrugged. "Everyone has to do their homework." But Draco wasn't satisfied with that answer. He kept watching Harry, kept trying to figure him out. Harry knew it was only a matter of time before Draco figured out that he was hiding something. He needed a distraction. The distraction came in the form of the Quidditch team. Harry had tried out for the team in first year, had made it as the youngest seeker in a century. But he hadn't had time to practice properly since discovering the chamber. Now he threw himself back into it, hoping the sport would give him cover. It worked. Harry was good at Quidditch, really good. The flying came naturally to him, and the competition distracted his housemates from his other activities. They watched him practice, cheered him on in the matches, and forgot to ask questions. But there was one person who wasn't fooled. Professor Severus Snape had been watching Harry since his first day at Hogwarts. He'd hated Harry on sight, had taken every opportunity to humiliate him in class. But now something had changed. Snape was watching Harry with a new intensity, as if he sensed something different about the boy. It was during potions class that Snape made his move. "Potter," he said, his voice silky and dangerous. "Stay after class." Harry felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He'd been expecting this, had known it was only a matter of time before Snape confronted him. But he wasn't ready, not yet. The other students filed out of the classroom, casting curious glances back at Harry. When they were gone, Snape moved closer, his black robes swirling around him. "You've been busy," Snape said. "I can sense it. There's something different about you." Harry met his gaze, refusing to look away. "I don't know what you mean, Professor. Don't lie to me." Snape's voice was cold, his eyes burning with a dark intensity. "I've been teaching for 15 years. I can tell when a student is hiding something." "You're imagining things," Harry said. "I've just been studying. Getting ready for exams." Snape's lips twisted into a sneer. "Studying? Yes, I'm sure that's what you've been doing. You've always been a dedicated student, haven't you, Potter?" Harry felt a surge of anger, but he suppressed it. "Is there anything else, Professor? I have a Quidditch practice to get to." Snape stared at him for a long moment. Then, Slowly, he nodded. Go, then. But this conversation isn't over. Harry left the classroom, his heart pounding. Snape knew something, or at least suspected something. He'd have to be more careful. But he couldn't stop now. He was too close, had come too far. The power was within his reach, and he wasn't going to let anything stop him. The year continued. Harry grew stronger, more powerful. He mastered the technique Slytherin taught him, learned to harness his magic in ways he'd never imagined. He could feel the power surging through his veins, a constant hum of energy that made him feel alive. But he also grew more isolated. The other students didn't understand what was happening to him, couldn't feel the changes. They just knew that Harry was different, that there was something strange about him. Even his friends noticed. Hermione wrote to him regularly, but her letters were filled with questions she didn't dare ask out loud. Ron was distant, awkward, unsure how to act around him. Only Draco seemed to accept him, drawn to the power Harry was accumulating. It was Draco who first mentioned the other students. "They're talking about you," he said one evening in the common room. "The other houses. They're saying you're not the same, that something's changed." Harry didn't look up from his book. "Let them talk. They're saying you're going dark," Draco continued. "That you're turning into a Death Eater." Harry closed his book and looked at Draco. "And what do you think?" Draco hesitated. "I think you're not telling me everything. I think you're keeping secrets." "We all have secrets," Harry said. "Don't you?" Draco's face flushed. "I'm not hiding anything. I'm loyal to my family, to my house. That's more than I can say for you." Harry studied him for a moment. Draco was proud, ambitious, and hungry for power. He was also insecure, desperate to prove himself to his father and his peers. That insecurity could be exploited. "Loyalty is important," Harry said carefully. "But it should be earned, not given freely. You've been loyal to me, Draco. I won't forget that." Draco's expression softened. "Good. I'm glad to hear it. But there are things I can't tell you," Harry continued. "Not yet. I need to be sure you're ready to hear them." Draco straightened, his eyes gleaming with a new intensity. "I'm ready. Whatever it is, I'm ready." Harry nodded slowly. "We'll see. When the time comes, you'll know." He left Draco in the common room, his thoughts churning. He'd taken the first step toward building his alliance. Draco was a useful ally, wealthy, connected, ambitious. With him on his side, Harry could begin to build the power base he needed. But Draco was just the beginning. Harry began to recruit other students. Not openly, he was too careful for that. But he identified the ones who were ambitious, who were hungry for something more. He found them in every house, the Ravenclaws who wanted to be more than just scholars, the Hufflepuffs who craved recognition, the Gryffindors who secretly doubted their own courage. He spoke to them in whispers, made vague promises, hinted at the power he could offer. Most of them dismissed him as a delusional first year, but a few listened. A few were willing to follow him. They called themselves the Serpent Alliance. It was a secret society, hidden from the teachers and the other students. They met in the room of requirement, the same room Harry had used for his private practice. They shared knowledge, tested their spells, and planned for the future. Harry didn't tell them about the Chamber of Secrets. That was his secret, his alone. But he shared enough to keep them loyal, to make them believe they were part of something important. It was the beginning of something bigger. By the end of the year, Harry's reputation had grown. He was no longer just the boy who lived, the famous orphan who defeated Voldemort. He was something more, a leader, a potential power in the wizarding world. The teachers noticed. Dumbledore watched him with a worried expression, always seeming to know more than he let on. McGonagall was cautious, treating Harry with a careful respect. Snape was openly hostile, but there was something else in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or fear. Harry didn't care. He was beyond their approval, beyond their judgment. He had his own path to follow. The last day of term arrived, and Harry packed his trunk with a feeling of satisfaction. He'd accomplished a lot this year, more than anyone expected. He'd discovered the Chamber of Secrets, unlocked its power, and begun to build his influence. But there was still so much more to do. He stood on the platform at King's Cross, waiting for the train. The Dursleys would be there soon, ready to take him back to Privet Drive. But Harry wasn't afraid. The cupboard under the stairs couldn't hold him anymore, not really. He was already free. As the train pulled into the station, Harry saw a familiar face in the crowd. Dumbledore was standing on the platform, watching him with a strange expression. "Harry," the headmaster said, approaching him. "A word, if you don't mind." Harry nodded, stepping away from the crowd. "What is it, Professor?" Dumbledore looked at him, his blue eyes filled with an old sadness. "I've been watching you this year. You've grown so much, so quickly. I'm proud of what you've accomplished." Harry felt a surge of wariness. "Thank you, Professor. But I'm also concerned," Dumbledore continued. "You're walking a dangerous path, Harry. The path of ambition can lead to greatness, but it can also lead to ruin. I don't want to see you fall." Harry met his gaze, his expression neutral. "I appreciate your concern, Professor. But I know what I'm doing." Dumbledore sighed. "I hope you do, Harry. I truly hope you do." He walked away, leaving Harry standing alone on the platform. The headmaster's words echoed in Harry's mind, but he pushed them aside. Dumbledore didn't understand. No one understood. He was the heir of Slytherin. He was destined for greatness. And nothing was going to stop him. Chapter 4, Secrets of Salazar. The summer before his third year was different from any Harry had known. He returned to Privet Drive with his trunk, his wand, and his secrets. The Dursleys were still there, still pretending he didn't exist, but Harry barely noticed them. His mind was elsewhere, consumed by the knowledge he'd accumulated in the Chamber of Secrets. The journals of Salazar Slytherin had been just the beginning. Beneath the chamber, hidden in a network of tunnels that Harry had only begun to explore, there was more. So much more. Ancient libraries, forgotten laboratories, chambers filled with artifacts that had been sealed away for centuries. Harry had spent every spare moment of the previous year exploring these tunnels, uncovering the secrets that Slytherin had left behind. And now, with the summer stretching before him, he had time to study them properly. The Dursleys' house became a prison again, but Harry had long ago learned to make prisons work for him. He spent his days in his room, reading and practicing. He spent his nights in the garden, testing spells and refining his control. He was careful, always careful, never letting the Dursleys see what he was doing. But it was hard. The magic inside him was growing, pushing against the boundaries of his control. He could feel it humming beneath his skin, a constant pressure that demanded release. Some nights, he lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the power surge through him like electricity. He needed to learn more. He needed to understand. The journals spoke of ancient magic, of powers that had been lost to the modern world. Blood magic. Soul magic. The magic of the old gods, the earth, the stars. Slytherin had studied them all, had mastered them in ways that no wizard had done since. But there were warnings too. The old magic was dangerous, the journals said. It demanded sacrifice, required a price that few were willing to pay. Those who sought power without understanding would be consumed by it. Harry read those warnings carefully, filing them away. He wasn't interested in being consumed. He was interested in control. The weeks passed in a blur of study and practice. Harry learned to harness the old magic, to channel it through his body without losing himself to it. He learned to sense the ley lines that crisscrossed the earth, to draw on their power for his spells. He learned to see the world differently, to perceive the magical currents that flowed beneath the surface of reality. It was like learning to see in a whole new way. The ordinary world was just a veil, a thin layer of illusion that hid the true nature of things. Harry was beginning to pierce that veil, to see the world as it really was. And he was beginning to understand his place in it. He was more than just the boy who lived, more than just a wizard. He was the heir of Slytherin, the inheritor of a legacy that stretched back 1,000 years. He was a bridge between the old world and the new, a conduit for powers that had been forgotten. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. But Harry didn't let the terror stop him. He couldn't afford to be afraid. The world was changing, moving toward something dark. Voldemort was out there, somewhere, rebuilding his power. The ministry was corrupt, the old families were circling, and Dumbledore was playing his own game. Harry needed to be ready. He needed to be strong enough to face whatever came. So he trained. He studied. He grew. And he waited. The letter from Hogwarts arrived in late July, as expected. Harry read it quickly, noting the list of required books and supplies. He'd need to visit Diagon Alley soon, to stock up for the coming year. But there was something else in the letter this time. A note from the headmaster, written in Dumbledore's elegant hand. Dear Harry, it read, I would like to meet with you before the start of term. There are things we need to discuss. Please come to my office at your earliest convenience. Harry read the note 3 times, trying to understand its meaning. Dumbledore wanted to meet with him. That was unusual, to say the least. The headmaster had never shown much interest in Harry before, at least not beyond the usual concern for a student's welfare. Why now? What had changed? Harry didn't know. But he'd learned to be suspicious of Dumbledore's motives. The old wizard had his own agenda, his own plans. Harry was just a piece on his board. A piece that was starting to move on its own. He wrote back to Dumbledore, agreeing to the meeting. He'd go to Hogwarts early, before the start of term, and find out what the headmaster wanted. But he'd be careful. He'd keep his secrets close and his wits about him. The meeting was set for the 1st of August, a week before the start of term. Harry traveled to Hogwarts by flow powder, stepping out of the fireplace in the headmaster's office with a swirl of green flame. Dumbledore was waiting for him, seated behind his massive desk. The office was the same as always, cluttered with silver instruments, portraits of past headmasters, and the soft chirping of Fawkes the Phoenix. Harry, Dumbledore said, rising to greet him. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. Harry sat down in the chair across from the desk, keeping his expression neutral. You said you wanted to see me, Professor. Yes. Dumbledore sat back down, folding his hands on the desk. I've been watching you, Harry. You've grown a great deal in the past 2 years. More than most students do in their entire time at Hogwarts. Harry said nothing. He knew what Dumbledore was doing, testing him, probing for weaknesses. I'm curious, Dumbledore continued, about how you've managed to progress so quickly. Your teachers speak highly of you, of course. But they also notice that there's something different about you. Different how? Harry asked, keeping his voice neutral. Different in ways that concern me, Dumbledore said. The magic you're using is old, Harry. Older than you realize. I can sense it on you, like a scent that clings to your clothes. Harry felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Dumbledore knew. He didn't know everything, not yet, but he knew enough. I'm just studying, Harry said. Trying to get ahead. Dumbledore shook his head, a sad smile playing on his lips. I know about the Chamber of Secrets, Harry. I've known about it for a long time. But I didn't expect you to find it. The cold knot tightened. Harry kept his expression still, but inside, he was racing. How much did Dumbledore know? How much had he guessed? I found it by accident, Harry said carefully. During my second year. I was exploring the castle and I stumbled across the entrance. It was just a door. I opened it. And what did you find inside? Dumbledore asked. Harry hesitated. He could lie, could pretend he'd found nothing of importance. But Dumbledore would see through that, would know he was hiding something. I found Slytherin's journals, he said finally. And other things. Old magic, forgotten arts. I've been studying them. Dumbledore nodded slowly. I see. And you've been learning from them? Yes, Harry said. I've learned a lot. It's been helpful. Dumbledore leaned forward, his blue eyes piercing into Harry's. Helpful? Or dangerous, Harry? The magic of Salazar Slytherin is not something to be trifled with. It is powerful, yes, but it is also corrupting. It has led many wizards to ruin. I'm not going to be corrupted, Harry said, a note of defiance creeping into his voice. I know what I'm doing. Do you? Dumbledore asked. I've seen the path you're walking. It's the same path that Tom Riddle walked, when he was a student here. He was brilliant, ambitious, and hungry for power. He found the Chamber of Secrets, just as you did. And it destroyed him. Harry stared at the headmaster, a cold fury building in his chest. I'm not Voldemort. I'm nothing like him. No, Dumbledore agreed. You're not. But the line between ambition and arrogance is a thin one, Harry. And the road to darkness is paved with good intentions. Harry wanted to argue, to defend himself. But he knew it would be pointless. Dumbledore had made up his mind, had decided that Harry was on a dangerous path. Nothing Harry said would change that. I appreciate your concern, Professor, he said, his voice cold and formal. But I'm not going to stop. This is who I am. This is what I need to do. Dumbledore sighed, a deep, weary sound. I was afraid you'd say that. Very well, Harry. I won't try to stop you. But I want you to promise me something. What? Harry asked. If you ever feel that you're losing control, Dumbledore said, if you ever feel that the magic is overwhelming you, come to me. I'll help you. No judgment, no punishment. I just want you to be safe. Harry stared at the old wizard, searching for the trick, the hidden agenda. But Dumbledore's face was open, honest. He meant what he said. Okay, Harry said. I promise. He didn't mean it. He had no intention of going to Dumbledore for help. But it was easier to lie than to argue. Dumbledore nodded, apparently satisfied. Good. Now, I believe you have some shopping to do. Don't let me keep you. Harry left the office, his mind churning. Dumbledore knew about the chamber. He knew about the old magic. That changed everything. He'd have to be more careful, even more careful than before. And he'd have to accelerate his plans. The third year began with a new wave of challenges. Harry had grown, both in power and in confidence. The old magic was flowing through him now, a constant companion that he could call on at will. His spells were stronger, more precise. His control was absolute. But his relationships were suffering. The other Slytherins looked at him with a mixture of admiration and fear. They knew he was different, knew he was hiding something. They didn't trust him, not really. But they were drawn to him, pulled by the power they sensed beneath his surface. Draco was the most conflicted. He'd been Harry's ally for 2 years now, had helped him build the Serpent Alliance. But he was also jealous, resentful of Harry's growing power. You're not telling me everything, Draco said one evening in the common room. I can feel it. There's something you're hiding. Harry looked at him, weighing his options. Draco was useful, but he was also a liability. If he became too suspicious, he might become a threat. I'm not hiding anything, Harry said smoothly. I've just been studying. You know how it is. Draco shook his head. It's more than that. I've been watching you. You're stronger than everyone else in our year, maybe even in the older years. How? Harry considered the question. He could lie again, could brush Draco off with another excuse. But lying was exhausting, and Draco was getting harder to fool. I found something, Harry said finally. In the castle. A secret that no one else knows about. Draco leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with excitement. What kind of secret? The Chamber of Secrets, Harry said. Salazar Slytherin's hidden library. There's magic there, old magic, that no one has touched for 1,000 years. Draco's eyes went wide. You found the chamber? That's impossible. It's a legend. It's real, Harry said. I've been using it for months. That's how I've gotten so powerful. Draco stared at him, his face a mixture of awe and envy. You have to show me, he said. I need to see it. Harry shook his head. Not yet. It's too dangerous. The teachers are watching, and Dumbledore already suspects something. If we're caught, it's all over. Then when? Draco demanded. When can I see it? When the time is right, Harry said. I'll know when. Until then, you have to trust me. Draco's expression darkened. I don't like this, Potter. You're keeping me in the dark. I've been loyal to you, and you're treating me like a tool. You are a tool, Harry said, his voice cold. Just as I'm a tool for you. We use each other, Draco. That's how alliances work. Draco's face flushed with anger. You're wrong about me. I'm not just a tool. I'm your friend. Harry met his gaze. Are you? Or are you just someone who wants to benefit from my power? The silence between them stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Draco looked away. You're right, he said quietly. I do want to benefit from your power. But I also want to be your friend. Is that so wrong? Harry sighed. Draco was more complicated than he'd realized. The boy genuinely wanted to be his friend, to be part of something larger than himself. That was both a strength and a weakness. I'm not good at friendship, Harry admitted. I never learned how. The Dursleys made sure of that. Draco looked at him, a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. Neither did I. My father is, well, you know what he's like. But I want to learn. I want to be better. Harry studied him for a long moment. Draco was offering something genuine, something that Harry had never had. A real connection. A true friendship. It was dangerous. Attachment was a weakness, something that could be exploited. But it could also be a strength, a source of loyalty that went beyond self-interest. Okay, Harry said finally. We can be friends. But you have to understand something. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep getting stronger, keep gaining power. If you want to stay with me, you have to be ready for that. I'm ready, Draco said. I've always been ready. Harry nodded. Good. Then I'll show you the chamber. He took Draco to the chamber that night, leading him through the secret passages and down into the depths of the castle. Draco was silent, his eyes wide with awe as they descended into the ancient space. The chamber was the same as always, vast, dark, filled with the memory of Salazar Slytherin's power. Harry led Draco to the statue of the founder and gestured around them. This is it, Harry said. The legacy of our house. Draco stared at the statue, his face filled with reverence. It's incredible, he breathed. I never thought I'd see this. And this, Harry said, gesturing to the journals and artifacts he'd collected, is what I've been learning. The old magic, the secrets that have been lost for 1,000 years. Draco turned to him, his eyes bright. You have to teach me, Harry. You have to show me how to use it. Harry hesitated. Sharing the old magic was a risk, a vulnerability. But if he wanted Draco's loyalty, he'd have to offer something in return. Okay, he said. I'll teach you. But it's going to take time. This isn't something you can learn overnight. I know, Draco said. I'm patient. I can wait. Harry nodded, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. He'd never had a friend before, not really. Ron and Hermione had been allies, useful connections. But Draco was different. Draco understood him, saw the ambition that drove him. Maybe friendship wasn't such a weakness after all. The year continued, and Harry's influence grew. The Serpent Alliance expanded, drawing in students from every house. They met in the Room of Requirement, sharing knowledge and practicing spells. Harry taught them the techniques he'd learned from the old magic, watching as they grew stronger and more confident. But he was always careful. He never shared his deepest secrets, never revealed the full extent of his power. He was the leader, the guide, the one who held the knowledge. They needed him, depended on him, and that gave him control. The teachers noticed, of course. Dumbledore's eyes followed Harry wherever he went, filled with concern. Snape was openly hostile, but there was a new respect in his gaze. McGonagall was cautious, watching Harry with the same wariness she'd always shown. But Harry didn't care. He was beyond their judgment. The old magic was changing him. He could feel it in his bones, in the way his spells responded to his will, in the way the world seemed to bend around him. He was becoming something more than human, something that had not been seen in the wizarding world for 1,000 years. It was intoxicating. But it was also dangerous. The power demanded more, always more. Harry could feel it pulling at him, whispering in his mind, tempting him to go further, to take more, to become more. He resisted. He had to. The line between power and corruption was thin, and Harry had no intention of crossing it. But the whispers were getting louder. It was in the middle of the night that Harry found the hidden passage. He'd been exploring the lower levels of the castle, looking for more secrets, more artifacts. The Chamber of Secrets had been just the beginning. There was more beneath Hogwarts, much more, and Harry was determined to find it. The passage was hidden behind a tapestry on the 4th floor, a secret that Harry had missed in his earlier explorations. He'd been walking past it when he felt a pull, a whisper of old magic that called to him. He pushed aside the tapestry and found a door, carved with the same serpent motifs as the chamber. Harry spoke the Parseltongue words that opened it, and the door swung open, revealing a dark staircase that spiraled down into the earth. Harry descended, his wand lighting the way. The staircase seemed to go on forever, deeper and deeper beneath the castle. The air grew colder, damper, filled with the smell of earth and stone. Finally, the staircase ended, opening into a vast chamber. Harry stopped at the entrance, his breath catching in his throat. This was not the Chamber of Secrets. This was something else entirely. The room was filled with books, thousands of them, stacked on shelves that rose up to the ceiling. There were artifacts too, strange and ancient, glowing with a faint magical light. And in the center of the room, there was a pedestal, and on the pedestal, a book. Harry walked toward it, feeling the power pulsing from the book. It was old, older than anything he'd ever seen. The cover was black leather, cracked and worn with age. There was no title, no inscription. Just a faint glow that seemed to emanate from within. He reached out and touched it. The book opened, and Harry felt a surge of power so strong that it knocked him backward. He fell to the floor, gasping, his mind flooded with images and knowledge. The book was a journal, just like the others. But this one was different. This one was written by someone older, someone more powerful than Salazar Slytherin. The author was a wizard named Merlin, a legendary figure from the dawn of magic. He'd been the first to understand the true nature of power, the first to harness the old magic that had been lost to the modern world. And he'd written it all down, every secret, every technique, every forbidden art. Harry lay on the floor, gasping, his mind reeling. The knowledge was overwhelming, too much to process all at once. But he understood one thing, this was what he'd been looking for. This was the key to everything. He picked himself up, clutching the book to his chest. The old magic surged through him, demanding release. Harry opened his mouth, and a word came out, a word that had not been spoken for 1,000 years. And the world changed. Chapter 5, The Game of Power. The word echoed through the chamber like a bell, resonating with power that Harry could feel in his bones. For a moment, the world seemed to shift, reality bending around the ancient syllable. Then the moment passed, and Harry was left standing in the underground library, the book clutched to his chest, his heart pounding. He had spoken a word of the old magic, a word that had not been uttered in centuries. And he had felt it work, felt the power surge through him like a living thing. But he didn't know what it had done. Harry stood still for a long moment, waiting for something to happen. The chamber was silent, the books undisturbed, the artifacts glowing with their faint light. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had changed. He could feel it in the air, in the subtle shift of magical currents that flowed through the room. The word had awakened something, had set in motion forces that Harry didn't fully understand. He needed to be careful. The old magic was dangerous, unpredictable. If he wasn't careful, it would consume him. Harry took a deep breath, steadying himself. Then he looked down at the book in his hands, at the faded script that covered its pages. This was Merlin's journal, the record of the most powerful wizard who had ever lived. If Harry could understand it, could master its secrets, there would be no limit to what he could achieve. But first, he had to get out of this chamber. He tucked the book into his robes and began to explore the room. There were other books here, other artifacts, other secrets waiting to be uncovered. Harry catalogued them in his mind, marking the ones he would return to. But the Merlin journal was his priority. It was the key to everything. He found the way out, a hidden door at the back of the chamber that led to a staircase spiraling upward. Harry climbed it, emerging in a corridor he didn't recognize. He was deep in the castle, somewhere beneath the dungeons, in a part of Hogwarts that even he hadn't explored. He was going to need a map. The weeks that followed were a blur of study and practice. Harry spent every spare moment in the hidden library, reading Merlin's journal and practicing the techniques it described. The book was dense, filled with concepts that were difficult to grasp. But Harry was determined. He worked through the difficult passages, pushed through the frustration, and slowly began to understand. Merlin had been a genius, a wizard who had seen beyond the limits of ordinary magic. He had understood that the true power of magic came from the mind, from the will, from the deep connection between the caster and the world around them. The wand is a focus, Merlin had written, echoing the words of Salazar Slytherin. But the mind is the true instrument of magic. Those who rely on incantations and gestures are like children playing with toys. The master of magic needs no wand. He needs only his will. Harry had heard those words before, in Slytherin's journals. But Merlin went further, much further. He described techniques for strengthening the mind, for expanding the will, for connecting to the fundamental forces of creation. Harry practiced those techniques every day. He meditated for hours, focusing his mind, pushing his consciousness deeper into the magical currents that flowed through the world. He practiced visualization, imagining the spells he wanted to cast until they became real in his mind. He practiced control, learning to direct his power with precision. And he grew stronger. The other students noticed, of course. They could feel the change in Harry, the growing power that radiated from him like heat from a fire. Some were drawn to it, eager to bask in his glow. Others were repelled, frightened by what they sensed. The Serpent Alliance grew, drawing in more members from every house. Harry's reputation spread through the school, whispered in corridors and common rooms. He was no longer just the boy who lived, the famous orphan who defeated Voldemort. He was something more, a leader, a potential power in the wizarding world. But Harry was careful. He didn't reveal the extent of his power, didn't show his hand too early. He was building his influence slowly, methodically, making connections that would serve him in the future. He met with students from other houses, learning about their families, their ambitions, their secrets. He cultivated relationships with pure-blood families, with wealthy families, with anyone who could be useful. He listened more than he spoke, filing away information for future use. And he studied the wizarding world, learning its history, its politics, its hidden currents. The Ministry of Magic was a labyrinth of corruption and incompetence, Harry discovered. The pure-blood families held most of the power, controlling the Wizengamot and the key positions in the ministry. They used that power to protect their own interests, to maintain the status quo, to keep anyone else from rising. But there were fractures in their control. The old families were divided, fighting among themselves for scraps of power. The new families, the half-bloods and Muggle-borns, were growing restless, demanding change. And the ministry itself was in crisis, torn between reform and reaction. Harry saw an opportunity. He began to study the political system, learning its rules and its weaknesses. He read about the Wizengamot, the ancient council that governed the wizarding world. He learned about the laws that had been passed, the decrees that had been issued, the power struggles that had shaped the modern magical world. He realized that influence was more powerful than raw magical strength. A wizard with political connections could achieve more than a wizard with a powerful wand. Harry understood that now, understood that the game of power was played on multiple levels. He needed to master all of them. It was during the Christmas holidays that Harry made his first political move. The Malfoys invited him to their manor for a winter gala, a gathering of the most influential families in the wizarding world. Harry had known about the invitation for weeks, had been preparing for it carefully. He arrived at Malfoy Manor in formal robes, his hair neatly combed, his expression controlled. The manor was enormous, a sprawling estate that screamed wealth and power. Harry walked through the gilded halls, his eyes taking in everything. Lucius Malfoy greeted him at the entrance, his silver hair gleaming in the candlelight. "Harry Potter," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Welcome to Malfoy Manor. We're honored to have you." Harry bowed slightly, the gesture exactly right for the occasion. "Thank you, Mr. Malfoy. The honor is mine." Lucius smiled, a thin, calculating expression. "I've heard so much about you from my son. He speaks very highly of you." "Draco is a good friend," Harry said. "I'm grateful for his loyalty." Lucius nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Loyalty is a precious commodity, Mr. Potter. In these times, it's more important than ever to know who your allies are." Harry met his gaze. "I couldn't agree more." The gala was a whirlwind of introductions and conversations. Harry met dozens of wizards, each one more powerful than the last. He spoke with members of the Wizengamot, with wealthy industrialists, with scholars and politicians and old families who remembered the Potters from before the war. He charmed them all. He was polite, deferential, but also sharp, intelligent, clearly someone to be taken seriously. He asked the right questions, made the right observations, left each person feeling that they'd met someone special. By the end of the evening, Harry had made a dozen valuable contacts. He'd learned about the currents of power that flowed through the wizarding world, about the alliances and enmities that shaped its politics. He'd planted seeds that would grow into something more. And he'd made an impression on Lucius Malfoy. "Harry," Lucius said, pulling him aside at the end of the evening. "I have something to discuss with you. A proposition, if you will." Harry nodded, his expression curious. "I'm listening." Lucius leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm not going to pretend that I don't know about your activities. My son has told me about the Serpent Alliance, about your growing influence at Hogwarts. I'm impressed. Harry kept his expression neutral. "Thank you, Mr. Malfoy. But I wonder," Lucius continued, "if you've considered the possibilities beyond Hogwarts. The wizarding world is changing, Harry. The old order is crumbling, and new powers are rising. I think you could be one of those powers, if you play your cards right." Harry felt a surge of excitement, but he suppressed it. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Malfoy?" "I'm suggesting an alliance," Lucius said. "I have influence in the Ministry, in the Wizengamot. I can help you. In return, I would ask for your consideration when you rise to power." Harry studied the older wizard, weighing his options. Lucius Malfoy was dangerous, a master manipulator who would betray anyone if it suited his purposes. But he was also powerful, connected, and useful. "I'm not ready to make that kind of commitment yet," Harry said carefully. "But I'm willing to continue this conversation. In the future." Lucius smiled, a predatory expression. "I understand. The young must be cautious. But remember, Harry, the offer stands. When you're ready to make a move, I'll be here." Harry left the manor feeling exhilarated and wary. He'd made a powerful connection, but he'd also made a potential enemy. Lucius Malfoy was not someone to be trusted. But he could be used. The new term began, and Harry threw himself back into his studies. The Merlin Journal was teaching him things he'd never imagined, secrets that had been lost to the wizarding world for centuries. Harry was growing more powerful, more confident. The old magic flowed through him like a river, a constant companion that he could call on at will. But he was also growing more isolated. The other students looked at him with a mixture of admiration and fear. They didn't understand what he was becoming, didn't understand the power that was growing inside him. Even his friends were keeping their distance. Hermione had written to him several times, but her letters were filled with questions he didn't want to answer. Ron was awkward, uncertain, unsure how to act around him. Only Draco seemed to accept him, drawn to the power Harry was accumulating. Harry didn't mind the isolation. It was easier that way, simpler. He didn't have to pretend to be something he wasn't. He could focus on his goals, his ambitions, his plans. The old magic was changing him. He could feel it in his bones, in the way his spells responded to his will, in the way the world seemed to bend around him. He was becoming something more than human, something that had not been seen in the wizarding world for 1,000 years. But he was also becoming something darker. The whispers were getting louder, demanding more. Harry could feel them at the edge of his consciousness, tempting him with promises of power, of glory, of dominion over the world. It would be so easy to give in, to let the power take him, to become what the old magic wanted him to be. But Harry resisted. He had to. The line between power and corruption was thin, and Harry had no intention of crossing it. The old magic was a tool, not a master. Harry would use it, but he would not let it use him. It was during the spring semester that Harry had his most dangerous encounter yet. He was in the room of requirement, practicing the techniques from Merlin's journal, when the door opened and a familiar figure entered. Dumbledore stood in the doorway, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and concern. "Harry," he said. "I've been looking for you." Harry lowered his wand, his heart pounding. "Professor. I didn't expect to see you here." "I know," Dumbledore said. "You've been doing an excellent job of hiding. But I've been watching you, Harry. I know what you've been doing." Harry felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Dumbledore walked into the room, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor. "The Chamber of Secrets, the hidden library, the old magic. I know all of it." Harry stared at him, his mind racing. How much did Dumbledore know? How much had he guessed? "I found the chamber by accident," Harry said carefully. "I've been studying the journals, trying to learn more about magic." "Trying to learn more," Dumbledore repeated. "Or trying to gain power?" Harry met his gaze, refusing to look away. What's the difference? Dumbledore sighed, a deep, weary sound. The difference is everything, Harry. The pursuit of knowledge is noble. But the pursuit of power, that is a dangerous path. I'm not doing anything wrong, Harry said. I'm just trying to be the best wizard I can be. At what cost? Dumbledore asked. I've seen what the old magic does to people, Harry. It consumes them. It turns them into something they never wanted to be. Harry shook his head. I'm not going to let it consume me. I'm stronger than that. Are you? Dumbledore asked. I've been watching you all year, Harry. You're growing more powerful, yes, but you're also growing more distant. You're pushing away the people who care about you. You're losing yourself. I'm not losing myself, Harry said, his voice hardening. I'm finding myself. I'm becoming who I was meant to be. Dumbledore looked at him, his eyes filled with sadness. I was afraid you'd say that. The path you're walking, Harry, it's the same path I've seen so many others walk. The same path that led Tom Riddle to ruin. Stop comparing me to Voldemort, Harry said, his voice cold. I'm not him. I'll never be him. I hope not, Dumbledore said. But the road to darkness is paved with good intentions, Harry. Be careful that you don't become the thing you're trying to fight. He left the room, and Harry was alone. The headmaster's words echoed in his mind, but Harry pushed them aside. Dumbledore didn't understand. No one understood. The old magic was a gift, a power that Harry had been given for a reason. He was meant to use it, to shape the world according to his will. He was meant to be great. The whispers grew louder, promising him everything he'd ever wanted. Harry listened to them, let them fill him with the certainty of his destiny. He was the heir of Slytherin, the inheritor of the old magic. He was destined for greatness. Nothing was going to stop him. The political game continued. Harry cultivated his connections, building a network of allies that extended beyond Hogwarts. He corresponded with the families he'd met at Malfoy Manor, kept in touch with the contacts he'd made. He learned about the corruption in the Ministry, the infighting in the Wizengamot, the secret alliances that shaped the wizarding world. And he began to see his place in it. He wasn't just a student, not anymore. He was a player in a larger game, a game that had been going on for centuries. The old families, the Ministry, the Order, they were all pieces on a board, moving against each other in a dance that never ended. Harry intended to become the one who moved the pieces. He was careful, always careful. He never revealed the full extent of his ambition, never showed his hand too early. He was the perfect ally, loyal, capable, useful. The pureblood families trusted him, or at least trusted him enough to share their secrets. But Harry had his own agenda. The wizarding world was broken, corrupt. The Ministry was a joke, the Wizengamot was a puppet show, and the old families were rotting from within. Harry intended to tear it all down and build something new. Something better. Something that he controlled. It was a grand ambition, and Harry knew it was risky. But the old magic had given him power, and he intended to use it. The year ended, and Harry returned to Privet Drive with his secrets intact. The summer was a time of preparation. Harry studied Merlin's journal, practiced the old magic, and made plans for the future. He corresponded with his contacts, building his network, laying the groundwork for what was to come. He was ready. Almost ready. But there was still more to learn. The old magic was vast, and Harry had only scratched the surface. There were secrets still hidden, powers still untapped. And there was Voldemort. The Dark Lord was out there, somewhere, rebuilding his power. Harry knew he'd have to face him eventually, knew that their confrontation was inevitable. He needed to be ready, needed to be strong enough to win. So he trained. He studied. He grew. And he waited. The letters from Hogwarts arrived in July, as expected. Harry read through them, filing away the information. There was something new this year, a note from the Ministry, informing him of the Triwizard Tournament. Harry had heard about the tournament, of course. It was an ancient competition, a contest of skill and courage that was held every few decades. The champions were chosen by the Goblet of Fire, and they represented the three great schools of Europe. Harry had no intention of competing. The tournament was dangerous, and Harry had other plans. But the note also contained something else. A list of requirements, including proof of age. Harry was too young to compete, not yet 17. He filed that away too. The train to Hogwarts was the same as always, crowded, noisy, full of excited students. Harry found a compartment near the back and sat down, his mind churning with plans. He was going to be a champion, one way or another. He'd find a way around the age restriction, use the old magic to fool the Goblet of Fire. It was risky, but Harry was willing to take risks. The tournament was an opportunity, a chance to prove himself to the wizarding world. If he won, if he became the champion, his influence would grow. The old families would have to take him seriously, would have to see him as a power to be reckoned with. It was a gamble. But Harry was ready to take it. The compartment door slid open, and Draco entered. "Harry," he said, a grin on his face. "I've been looking for you. I heard about the tournament. Are you going to enter?" Harry smiled, a cold, calculating expression. "Yes. I'm going to enter. And I'm going to win." Draco laughed. "I knew it. I knew you wouldn't be able to resist." "Resistance is for the weak," Harry said. "And I'm not weak." He looked out the window at the Scottish countryside rolling by. The game was about to begin. And Harry intended to win. Chapter 6, The Chamber's True Heir. The Triwizard Tournament announcement had transformed Hogwarts. Harry walked through the corridors and felt the change in the air, the electric excitement, the whispered conversations, the way students from every house looked at each other with new eyes. The tournament was ancient, dangerous, and prestigious. To be chosen as a champion was to be marked for greatness. Harry had been thinking about that word a lot lately. Greatness. The old magic hummed beneath his skin, a constant companion that had grown stronger with each passing month. He had mastered Merlin's journal, unlocked secrets that had been buried for centuries. The power flowing through him was intoxicating, and Harry was beginning to understand just how far he could push it. The age restriction was a problem. The Goblet of Fire was ancient magic, bound by rules that even Dumbledore couldn't bend. But Harry had been studying ancient magic for nearly 2 years. He knew its weaknesses, its loopholes, its hidden pathways. He spent the weeks before the tournament preparing. In the room of requirement, he worked on a charm that would fool the goblet into accepting his name. It was delicate, dangerous work. If he made a mistake, the consequences could be catastrophic. But Harry was confident. The old magic had taught him to trust his instincts, to push beyond the boundaries of what was possible. He would find a way. The night of the choosing arrived, and the great hall was packed with students. The Goblet of Fire stood in the center of the room, its blue flames dancing in the darkness. Harry watched it from his seat at the Slytherin table, his heart pounding with anticipation. The champions were announced one by one. Victor Krum for Durmstrang. Fleur Delacour for Beauxbatons. Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts. And then, Harry's name. "Harry Potter," Dumbledore called out, his voice filled with shock and confusion. "Harry Potter has been chosen as the 4th champion." The hall erupted in chaos. Students shouted, teachers argued, and Harry sat perfectly still, his face a mask of calm. The old magic had worked. He was in. He made his way to the front of the hall, feeling the stares of every student in the room. The other champions looked at him with suspicion, and the teachers were clearly disturbed. But Harry didn't care. He was where he needed to be. The argument that followed was heated. The other champions, the headmasters, the ministry officials, all of them demanded to know how Harry had cheated. But Harry maintained his innocence, claiming he had no idea how his name had been entered. "I didn't put my name in," he said, his voice steady. "I don't know how this happened." It was a lie, of course. But it was a lie that had been carefully crafted, designed to raise suspicion while deflecting it. The teachers were forced to accept his story, forced to let him compete. The tournament rules were absolute. Once a name came out of the goblet, the chosen champion had to compete. Harry smiled inwardly. The game was on. The tasks were dangerous, designed to test the champion's skill, courage, and intelligence. Harry knew he could handle them. The old magic had made him stronger, faster, more capable than any of the other champions. But he also knew he had to be careful. He couldn't reveal the full extent of his power, couldn't let anyone see what he'd become. So he held back, just enough to seem impressive without being impossible. He won the first task with a clever use of a summoning charm, the second with a combination of underwater breathing spells and precise magic. Each victory earned him more respect, more admiration, more influence. But Harry didn't care about the victories. He cared about what they represented. He was proving himself to the wizarding world. He was showing them that he was not just the boy who lived, not just a lucky survivor. He was a wizard of real power, someone to be taken seriously. The old families noticed. Lucius Malfoy sent him a congratulatory letter, hinting at the alliance he'd proposed. Others followed, offering their support, their connections, their influence. Harry was building something, a network of power that extended far beyond Hogwarts. But he was also making enemies. Dumbledore watched him with increasingly worried eyes. Snape was openly hostile, but there was something else in his gaze now, fear, perhaps, or respect. The other champions viewed him with suspicion, convinced he'd cheated. And somewhere, in the shadows, Voldemort was watching too. The third task was the most dangerous. The champions had to navigate a maze filled with magical creatures, obstacles, and enchantments. It was a test of endurance, of cunning, of the will to survive. Harry knew this was where he would have to reveal more of his power. The maze was designed to kill, and only the strongest would emerge. He entered the maze with his wand raised, the old magic flowing through him. He was ready for anything. The maze was worse than he'd expected. Creatures leaped at him from the shadows, spells tried to trap him, illusions tried to confuse him. But Harry pushed through it all, using the old magic to protect himself, to guide him toward the center. He could sense the cup at the heart of the maze, a beacon of power that called to him. It wasn't just a trophy, Harry realized. It was something more. Something ancient. He reached the center just as Cedric Diggory did. They stood together, looking at the cup, the prize they'd both fought for. "Take it," Cedric said, gesturing toward the cup. "You deserve it, Harry. You've been brilliant." Harry shook his head. "We'll take it together." A tie. It was the right thing to say, the right thing to do. But Harry's mind was racing. The cup was more than it seemed. He could feel its magic, ancient and powerful, pulling at him. They reached for the cup at the same time, and the world dissolved. Harry landed hard. On the ground, the cup still in his hands. He was in a graveyard, dark and cold, surrounded by tombstones. Cedric was beside him, looking around in confusion. "Where are we?" Cedric asked. "What happened?" Harry didn't answer. He could feel the old magic surging around him, a familiar presence that made his skin prickle. Someone was here. Someone powerful. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and thin, with a face that was more skull than skin. Lord Voldemort. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said, his voice a whisper that seemed to echo in the darkness. "We meet again." Harry stood perfectly still, his heart pounding. He'd known this moment would come, had prepared for it in the Chamber of Secrets, in the hidden library, in the quiet hours of the night. But facing Voldemort was different from preparing for him. The Dark Lord spoke of his resurrection, of the ritual that had brought him back to life. Harry listened, his mind churning, looking for a way out. He was outnumbered, Voldemort's followers were everywhere, Death Eaters in black robes who watched him with hungry eyes. But Harry wasn't afraid. The old magic surged through him, filling him with power, with certainty. Voldemort might be the most dangerous wizard in the world, but Harry had something he didn't. He had the old magic. He had Merlin's secrets. He had the will to win. The duel that followed was brutal. Voldemort's spells were dark and powerful, designed to kill. But Harry's magic was different, older and more fluid. He could feel the Dark Lord's intentions, could anticipate his attacks. He moved like water, dodging and weaving, striking back with precision. Voldemort was amazed. "You have learned much, Potter. More than I expected." "I've learned everything," Harry said, his voice cold. "I've learned what you are, what you've become. And I will defeat you." Voldemort laughed, a high, cruel sound. "You can't defeat me, Potter. I am immortal. I have powers you can't imagine. I can imagine a lot," Harry said. "I've seen the darkness, Tom. I know its secrets. And I'm not afraid." The duel continued, but Harry was gaining the upper hand. The old magic was flowing through him like a river, giving him strength, speed, precision. Voldemort was powerful, but Harry was something else. Something new. He locked his wand with Voldemort's, a golden thread of light connecting them. The old magic surged, and Harry felt something else, a connection, a link between them that went beyond the duel. He could feel Voldemort's mind, his thoughts, his fears. And he could see the Dark Lord's weakness. "You're afraid," Harry said. "Afraid of me. Afraid of what I can do." Voldemort's eyes widened with rage. "I am not afraid of a child." "You should be," Harry said. "I've seen the future, Tom. I've seen your defeat. And I'm going to be the one who defeats you." The golden thread snapped, and Harry was thrown backward. Voldemort screamed in fury, but the old magic was already working, wrapping Harry in its protection. He grabbed Cedric and the cup, felt the familiar pull of portkey magic, and was gone. He landed back in the maze, gasping for breath. The cup was still in his hands, and Cedric was beside him. The crowd was cheering, but Harry could only hear the thudding of his own heart. He had done it. He had faced Voldemort and survived. He had seen the Dark Lord's weakness, felt his fear. The old magic surged through him, filling him with a cold certainty. The game had changed. Voldemort was back, but Harry was ready. He was stronger than Voldemort knew. He was the heir of Slytherin, the inheritor of the old magic. He was the one who would bring Voldemort down. But first, he had to deal with the tournament's aftermath. The wizarding world was in chaos. Voldemort's return was a reality that no one wanted to accept. The Ministry denied it, Dumbledore confirmed it, and Harry was caught in the middle. He gave his testimony to the Ministry, telling them what had happened. In the graveyard. The officials listened, but Harry could see the disbelief in their eyes. They didn't want to believe. They couldn't accept that the Dark Lord was back. Harry didn't care. He'd done what he needed to do. The rest was up to them. He returned to Hogwarts with a new sense of purpose. The tournament was over, but his real work was just beginning. He had faced Voldemort and learned his weakness. He had seen the future and knew what he had to do. He was going to destroy Voldemort. But he was going to do it his way. The old magic surged through him, a constant companion that had grown stronger with each passing day. Harry could feel it reshaping him, remaking him into something new. He was becoming more than just a wizard. He was becoming a force, a power that would reshape the wizarding world. The Serpent Alliance waited for him in the room of requirement. They had heard the news, had seen the fear in the eyes of the teachers. They looked to Harry for guidance, for hope, for leadership. Harry gave them what they needed. He spoke of unity, of strength, of the future they would build together. He promised them a new world, a world where the old fears and divisions would be forgotten. He was building something, a movement that would reshape the wizarding world. And he was just getting started. That night, Harry returned to the Chamber of Secrets. He had unfinished business there, secrets that needed to be uncovered. The chamber was the same as always, vast and dark and filled with the memory of Salazar Slytherin. But Harry felt different now. The old magic had changed him, given him new eyes, new understanding. He walked to the statue of Salazar Slytherin and looked up at its stone face. The founder's eyes seemed to watch him, filled with ancient wisdom. "I know what you want," Harry said. "You built this place for a reason. You wanted to preserve the old magic, to pass it on to someone worthy. I'm ready." The statue didn't answer. But Harry felt something shift, a subtle change in the magic around him. He moved past the statue, deeper into the chamber. There was a door he hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a tapestry. Harry pushed it open and found himself in a small room, filled with books and artifacts. In the center of the room, there was a pedestal. And on the pedestal, a sword. Harry walked toward it, feeling the pull of ancient magic. The sword was beautiful, its blade gleaming in the dim light. It was inscribed with runes, old symbols that Harry recognized from Merlin's journal. He reached out and touched it. The sword burned with power, filling Harry with a surge of energy. He could feel the ancient magic flowing through him, connecting him to something vast and eternal. He was the heir of Slytherin. He was the inheritor of the old magic. And he was ready to fulfill his destiny. Harry took the sword and left the chamber, his mind filled with plans. He had the power now. He had the weapon. All he needed was the opportunity. The war was coming. Voldemort was rising, and the wizarding world was about to be torn apart. Harry intended to be ready. He would fight. He would win. And he would build a new world from the ashes of the old. The serpent was ready to strike. Chapter 7, The Serpent Alliance. The sword burned against Harry's palm as he climbed out of the Chamber of Secrets, its ancient magic thrumming through his veins like a second heartbeat. He'd wrapped it in his robes, concealing it from view, but he could still feel its presence, a constant reminder of what he'd become. The corridors of Hogwarts were empty at this hour, the castle sleeping around him. Harry moved through the shadows with practiced ease, his footsteps silent on the stone floors. He'd spent years learning to be invisible, to move through spaces without being seen. Now that skill served him well. He reached the room of requirement and spoke the password. The door appeared, and Harry slipped inside. The room had transformed itself into a council chamber, with a long table and high-backed chairs arranged in a circle. The walls were lined with bookshelves and tapestries, and the fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room. The Serpent Alliance was waiting for him. Draco sat at the head of the table, his face pale but determined. Around him were the others, students from every house, drawn together by ambition and the promise of something more. There was Blaise Zabini, cool and calculating, his dark eyes watching Harry with sharp intelligence. Theodore Nott, quiet and intense, his loyalties carefully hidden. Daphne Greengrass, elegant and poised, her expression unreadable. And others, Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs and even a few Gryffindors who'd grown disillusioned with the old ways. They rose as Harry entered, a gesture of respect that made something warm bloom in his chest. He'd earned this. He'd worked for it, bled for it. The loyalty of these students was a testament to everything he'd accomplished. "Harry," Draco said, stepping forward. "We heard what happened. The graveyard. Voldemort." He paused, as if the name itself was difficult to speak. "Is it true?" Harry nodded, his expression grim. It's true. He's back. The ritual worked, and he's returned to full power. A murmur ran through the group. Harry could see fear in their eyes, uncertainty. Voldemort's return was a shadow that had hung over the wizarding world for years. Now it was real, a threat that could no longer be denied. But Harry had expected this. He prepared for it. We knew this day would come, he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. We've been preparing for it, all of us. The Serpent Alliance was built for this moment. We are the ones who will stand against the darkness. He looked around the room, meeting each gaze in turn. I've seen Voldemort's weakness. I've felt his fear. He is powerful, yes, but he is not invincible. And we are stronger than he knows. How? It was Theodore. Not who spoke, his voice quiet but steady. How can we fight him? He has an army, Death Eaters, supporters in the ministry. We're just students. Harry smiled, a cold, calculating expression. That's exactly what they expect us to be. Weak. Powerless. Easy to ignore. And that's exactly why we'll win. He reached into his robes and drew out the sword, letting its blade catch the firelight. Gasps echoed around the room as the students saw the ancient weapon, the runes that glowed along its length. This is Salazar Slytherin's sword, Harry said. Forged in the age of the Founders, imbued with magic that has been lost for 1,000 years. It is a weapon of power, and it is mine. He placed the sword on the table, its blade gleaming in the firelight. But it's not just a weapon. It's a symbol. A symbol of what we can become if we have the courage to reach for it. He walked around the table, touching each student's shoulder as he passed. I've been studying the old magic for 2 years now. I've learned secrets that no living wizard knows. I can teach you those secrets, can make you stronger than you ever imagined. But I need your loyalty. Your commitment. Your willingness to do whatever it takes to build a new world. There was a moment of silence. Then Draco stepped forward. I'm with you, Harry, he said, his voice firm. I've always been with you. One by one, the others followed. They pledged their loyalty, their swords, their lives. Harry watched them, feeling the old magic surge through him, binding them together in ways they didn't fully understand. The Serpent Alliance was no longer just a group of ambitious students. It was an army. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Harry trained his followers in the old magic, teaching them the techniques he'd learned from Merlin's journal and Slytherin's archives. They met in the room of requirement every night, practicing spells and strategies, building their power. The students grew stronger, more confident. Harry could see the change in them, the way they carried themselves, the spark of something new in their eyes. They were no longer just students. They were warriors, preparing for a war that was coming. But Harry was careful. He didn't reveal everything, didn't share his deepest secrets. He kept the sword hidden, kept his full power concealed. His followers needed to trust him, to believe in him, but they didn't need to know everything. He also began to make contacts outside the school. Through Draco's family connections, he reached out to the old pureblood families, the Blacks, the Greengrasses, the Knots. He spoke to them of alliances, of rebuilding the wizarding world after Voldemort's defeat. He promised them power, influence, or return to the old ways. Most of them were skeptical. Harry was just a child, after all, no matter how famous. But some listened. Some saw the potential in him, the power that radiated from him like heat from a fire. Lucius Malfoy was the most eager. He wrote to Harry regularly, offering advice, support, connections. Harry accepted his help, but he was careful never to commit to anything. Lucius was a dangerous ally, one who would betray him if it suited his purposes. Harry intended to use him, not to be used by him. The ministry was also a target. Harry studied its structure, its weaknesses, its key players. He learned about the corruption that ran through its veins, the petty politics that paralyzed its decision-making. He identified officials who could be turned, who could be made to see things his way. It was slow work, building a power base from nothing. But Harry was patient. He'd learned patience in the cupboard under the stairs, had honed it over years of observation and waiting. He could wait a little longer. But the war was coming faster than he'd expected. The attacks began in the summer. Death Eaters emerged from the shadows, striking at Muggleborns and their families. The Ministry was helpless, too mired in denial to act effectively. Dumbledore tried to organize resistance, but the old wizard's influence was waning. Harry watched it all from a distance, his mind churning with calculations. Voldemort was making his move, testing the defenses, seeing how far he could push. The time for action was approaching. He gathered the Serpent Alliance for an emergency meeting in the Room of Requirement. "We can't wait any longer," Harry said, his voice urgent. "Voldemort is on the move. The Ministry is useless. It's up to us to fight back." "But we're just students," one of the Hufflepuffs protested. "What can we do?" "We can do more than you think," Harry said. "We have power. We have knowledge. We have each other. And we have something else, the element of surprise. No one expects us to be a threat." He looked around the room, meeting each gaze. "I'm not asking you to fight a war. I'm asking you to help me build something new. A network of resistance that can strike at Voldemort's forces, that can protect the innocent, that can give people hope." The students listened, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. Harry could see the doubt in their eyes, the uncertainty. But he could also see something else, a spark of belief, a willingness to try. "We'll start small," Harry continued. "We'll gather information, identify Death Eater activities, alert the authorities when we can. We'll protect Muggleborns, help them escape if they're threatened. We'll be the eyes and ears of the resistance." "And when the time is right?" Draco asked. Harry smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "When the time is right, we'll strike. We'll hit Voldemort where it hurts, show him that he's not untouchable. And we'll prove to the wizarding world that the old ways are over." The meeting ended with a sense of purpose. The students filed out of the room, their heads held high, their steps determined. Harry watched them go, feeling a surge of pride. He was building something. A movement. An army. A future. The war was coming, and Harry intended to win it. The first strike came 2 months later. Harry had identified a Death Eater safe house, a manor in the countryside where a group of Voldemort's followers were planning an attack on a Muggle village. He'd passed the information to the Ministry, but they'd ignored it, too focused on denial to act. So Harry acted himself. He gathered a small group of the Serpent Alliance, Draco, Blaise, Theodore, and a few others, and led them on a raid against the safe house. It was dangerous, reckless, exactly the kind of thing Harry had trained them to do. The fight was brutal. The Death Eaters were experienced and ruthless, far more powerful than Harry's young followers. But Harry had the old magic, and he had the sword. He cut through the Death Eaters' defenses like paper, his blade gleaming in the darkness. The Serpent Alliance fought beside him, their spells and strategies working in perfect coordination. They'd trained for this, prepared for this, and it showed. Within an hour, the safe house was secured, the Death Eaters defeated. The Ministry arrived the next morning, full of questions and accusations. Harry met them with calm explanations and carefully crafted lies. He'd acted on information, he said. He'd been trying to protect the Muggle village. He'd been forced to take matters into his own hands. The Ministry officials didn't believe him, but they couldn't prove anything. Harry was a hero, after all, the boy who lived, the champion of the Triwizard Tournament. To accuse him would be political suicide. They let him go, and Harry returned to Hogwarts with his reputation enhanced. The Serpent Alliance had proven its worth. Other students flocked to join, drawn by the promise of action and glory. Harry's influence grew, spreading through the school like a slow-burning fire. But with influence came enemies. Dumbledore summoned Harry to his office the week after the raid. The headmaster looked older, more tired. His blue eyes clouded with worry. "Harry," he said, his voice quiet. "I need to speak with you. About what you've been doing." Harry sat down across from the desk, his expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about, Professor. Don't play games with me." Dumbledore's voice was sharp, suddenly. "I know about the Serpent Alliance. I know about the raid on the safe house. I know you're building an army." Harry met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I'm building a resistance. Voldemort is back, and the Ministry is doing nothing. Someone has to act." "Someone," Dumbledore repeated. "But not you. Not yet. You're still a child, Harry. You don't have the experience, the wisdom, the—" "I have the power," Harry interrupted. "That's what matters. I have the power to fight, and I'm going to use it. You can't stop me." Dumbledore sighed, a deep, weary sound. "I'm not trying to stop you. I'm trying to help you. The path you're walking, Harry, it's dangerous. I've seen it before, in Tom Riddle. He had the same ambition, the same hunger for power. And it destroyed him." "I'm not Voldemort," Harry said, his voice cold. "I'm nothing like him." "No," Dumbledore agreed. "You're not. But the difference between you and him is smaller than you think. You both want to change the world. You both believe you know what's best. The only question is how far you're willing to go to get it." Harry stood up, his hands clenched at his sides. "I'm willing to go as far as I need to. Voldemort is a threat to everything I care about. I'll do whatever it takes to stop him." "I know," Dumbledore said softly. "That's what frightens me." Harry left the office, his mind churning. Dumbledore was afraid of him. That was good. Fear was a tool, a weapon that Harry could use. But it was also a warning. Dumbledore had seen the signs before, in another brilliant, ambitious student. He'd seen the path that led to darkness. Harry wasn't going to walk that path. He was stronger than Voldemort, smarter. He knew the dangers of the old magic, knew how to resist its temptations. He was in control. But as he walked through the corridors of Hogwarts, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that the headmaster was right. He was walking a dangerous path. One wrong step, and he could fall. The old magic surged through him, a constant companion. Harry felt its pull, its promise of power, of glory, of everything he'd ever wanted. He pushed it down, forcing himself to focus. He had work to do. The Serpent Alliance grew stronger. Harry trained his followers, honed their skills, prepared them for the war that was coming. He made more contacts, built more alliances, extended his influence throughout the wizarding world. The old families began to take notice. They saw Harry's power, his ambition, his willingness to do whatever it took. Some were wary, suspicious of the boy who'd risen so quickly. Others were eager, seeing in him a potential champion of their cause. Harry played them all, using each for his own purposes. He promised the purebloods a return to the old ways, promised the half-bloods equality, promised the Muggleborns protection. He told each group what they wanted to hear, building a coalition that stretched across the magical world. It was dangerous, balancing so many conflicting interests. One misstep, and it could all crumble. But Harry was careful, always careful. He'd learned to read people, to see their desires and fears. He knew how to manipulate them, how to make them do what he wanted. It was a game, a grand game of power and influence. And Harry was determined to win. But there were others playing the game too. Voldemort was moving, consolidating his power, striking at his enemies. The Death Eaters were everywhere, hunting Muggleborns, terrorizing the population. The ministry was in chaos, paralyzed by denial and incompetence. And Dumbledore was watching, always watching, waiting for the right moment to act. Harry knew he had to move faster. The war was coming, and he needed to be ready. He gathered the Serpent Alliance for another meeting, this time in the Chamber of Secrets. The ancient space was vast and dark, its walls lined with the memory of Salazar Slytherin. Harry stood before the statue of the founder, the sword in his hand. "Voldemort is growing stronger," he said. "Every day, more people die. Every day, his power grows. We can't wait any longer. What do you propose?" Draco asked. Harry smiled, a cold, determined expression. "We take the fight to him. We strike at his power base, his allies, his supporters. We show him that he's not invincible." The Serpent Alliance listened, their faces a mixture of fear and excitement. Harry could see their doubts, their hopes, their dreams. He was giving them something to believe in. "I'm not asking you to die," Harry said. "I'm asking you to fight. To stand up for what's right. To build a new world, a better world, for our children and grandchildren." He lifted the sword, letting its blade catch the light. "Who's with me?" One by one, the students stepped forward, pledging their loyalty. Harry watched them, feeling the old magic surge through him. He was building something vast and powerful. The Serpent Alliance was ready. And the war was about to begin. Chapter 8, The Shadow War. The war came to Hogwarts on a night when the moon was hidden behind clouds, and the castle's ancient stones trembled with the weight of approaching darkness. Harry stood in the astronomy tower, watching the Death Eaters gather at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. There were dozens of them, their masks gleaming in the faint light, their wands raised like a forest of spears. Behind them, Voldemort himself waited, a shadow among shadows, his red eyes fixed on the castle that had once been his home. The Serpent Alliance was ready. Harry had prepared them for this moment, had trained them in the old magic, had forged them into a weapon that would strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. They waited in the corridors below, their wands drawn, their hearts pounding with anticipation. But Harry had also prepared something else. Something that Voldemort didn't expect. He had been patient. For years, he had studied the Dark Lord, learned his weaknesses, his fears, his secrets. The old magic had revealed things that no one else knew, the nature of Voldemort's immortality, the fragments of his soul that he had hidden across the world. Harry knew where they were. He knew how to destroy them. And he had an army. The battle began at midnight. The Death Eaters surged forward, their spells lighting up the darkness like fireworks. The Order of the Phoenix fought beside them, Dumbledore's forces trying to hold the line. But Harry had other plans. He waited until the fighting was at its peak, until the defenders were stretched thin and the Death Eaters were pressing their advantage. Then he gave the signal. From the shadows, the Serpent Alliance emerged. They moved with perfect coordination, their spells precisely aimed, their tactics flawless. Harry had taught them to fight smart, not just hard. They struck at the Death Eaters' flanks, cutting off their retreat, trapping them between the castle walls and the forest. Voldemort watched from a distance, his red eyes narrowing with rage. He'd expected resistance, but not this. Not an army of children who fought like seasoned warriors. Harry descended from the tower, the sword in his hand. He walked through the chaos of the battle, his steps unhurried, his gaze fixed on the Dark Lord in the distance. The Death Eaters parted before him, as if sensing the power that radiated from his presence. He reached the edge of the forest and stopped. Voldemort was waiting for him, his wand raised, his face twisted with hatred. "Potter," Voldemort hissed. "You think you can defeat me? You think you can undo what I have built?" Harry met his gaze, his expression cold and calm. "I don't think, Tom. I know." Voldemort laughed, a high, cruel sound. "You know nothing. You are a child, playing at being a warrior. You have no idea what true power is. I know more than you think, Harry said. I know about the Horcruxes. I know about the fragments of your soul. I know that you are not invincible. Voldemort's eyes widened with shock, then narrowed with fury. You lie. You cannot know. I know where they are, Harry interrupted. I've already destroyed some. The diary. The ring. The locket. The cup. The diadem. And I know about the snake. Voldemort's face contorted with rage. You will pay for this, Potter. You will suffer in ways you cannot imagine. The time for threats is over, Harry said, raising his sword. It's time to end this. The duel that followed was unlike anything the wizarding world had ever seen. Voldemort threw everything at Harry, dark curses, killing spells, the full force of his power. But Harry had the old magic, and the old magic was stronger. He deflected the spells with a wave of his hand, his will shaping reality around him. He moved like water, flowing around Voldemort's attacks, striking back with precision. The sword blazed with ancient power, a light that seemed to push back the darkness itself. Voldemort screamed in fury, unleashing a spell that should have destroyed Harry utterly. But Harry didn't fall. The old magic wrapped around him, protecting him, and he felt a surge of power unlike anything he'd ever known. He was not just fighting Voldemort. He was fighting the darkness that had plagued the wizarding world for decades. He was fighting for the future, for the world he wanted to build. With a final, desperate cry, Harry thrust the sword forward. It pierced Voldemort's chest, and the Dark Lord's body convulsed, his wand falling from his hand. Harry felt the old magic surge through the blade, destroying the last fragment of Voldemort's soul. The Dark Lord fell, his body crumpling to the ground. And then he was gone, dissolving into ash that was carried away by the wind. Harry stood in the silence, the sword still in his hand, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The battle was over. Voldemort was dead. The Death Eaters fled, scattering into the night. The defenders cheered, their voices rising in a wave of triumph. But Harry didn't celebrate. He watched the darkness recede, feeling the weight of everything he'd done. The war was over. But the work was just beginning. The days that followed were filled with decisions. Harry was hailed as a hero, the wizard who had finally defeated Voldemort. The ministry offered him honors, awards, positions of power. The old families courted him, eager to align themselves with the new power in the wizarding world. But Harry had other plans. He gathered the Serpent Alliance in the Chamber of Secrets, the place where it had all begun. The Founder's statue loomed over them, a silent witness to what they were about to do. We've won, Harry said. Voldemort is gone. The war is over. But that's only the beginning. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his followers. The wizarding world is broken. The ministry is corrupt, the old families are divided, and the people are afraid. We need to fix it. We need to build something new. What are you proposing? Draco asked, his voice steady. I'm proposing a new order, Harry said. An order built on merit, not blood. An order where everyone has a chance to succeed, regardless of their birth. An order that will protect the innocent and punish the guilty. The students listened, their faces a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Harry could see their doubts, but he could also see their belief. They trusted him. They believed in him. I'm not going to be the minister for magic, Harry continued. That's not what I want. I want to build something different, something that will last beyond my lifetime. I want to create a new council, a body that represents all of the wizarding world. And I want you to be part of it. There was a moment of silence. Then Draco stepped forward. I'm with you, he said. I've always been with you. One by one, the others pledged their loyalty. Harry felt the old magic surge through him, binding them together in a way that went beyond words. The Serpent Alliance was no longer just an army. It was the foundation of a new world. The new order took shape slowly, carefully. Harry worked with the ministry, with the old families, with the Muggle-born communities, building a coalition that spanned the wizarding world. It wasn't easy. There were conflicts, disagreements, compromises that had to be made. But Harry was patient, determined. He'd learned the art of politics, of negotiation, of building consensus. The Serpent Council was established, a body of representatives from every part of the wizarding world. They met in a new chamber, a place that Harry had built in the heart of Hogwarts, a symbol of unity and hope. Harry sat at the head of the council, his position earned through years of struggle and sacrifice. He listened to the debates, guided the discussions, helped shape the policies that would define the future. He was the leader of the new wizarding world. Not a dictator, not a tyrant. A guide, a mentor, a figure who represented the best of what the magical community could be. But Harry knew that his work was never truly done. The old magic still flowed through him, a constant reminder of the power he'd unlocked. There were still secrets to uncover, still challenges to face. The wizarding world was changing, and Harry needed to change with it. He spent his nights in the Chamber of Secrets, studying the old texts, practicing the techniques that had made him powerful. He taught others, sharing his knowledge, building a legacy that would last beyond his lifetime. And he waited, patient and watchful, for the next challenge to arise. The years passed, and Harry's legend grew. He was the boy who lived, the champion who had defeated Voldemort. He was the leader of the New Order, the architect of a world that had risen from the ashes of war. He was the heir of Slytherin, the inheritor of the old magic, the serpent who had risen to shake the wizarding world. But he was also Harry. The boy from the cupboard under the stairs, the orphan who had learned to survive, the wizard who had chosen his own path. He stood on the shores of the Black Lake, looking out at the castle that had been his home for so many years. Hogwarts was still there, its towers reaching toward the sky, its magic humming beneath the surface of the world. The old magic surged through him, a constant companion that had never left him. Harry reached out with his will, feeling the currents of power that flowed through the castle, through the world, through everything. He was part of something larger now, something that had existed for 1,000 years and would continue long after he was gone. But he had made his mark. He had changed the wizarding world, had shaped it into something new. And he was at peace. The sun set over Hogwarts, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Harry turned and walked back toward the castle, his steps sure, his heart steady. The game of power was never truly over. But for now, Harry had won. The serpent had risen. And the wizarding world would never be the same. The war was over, but the silence that followed was heavier than any battle Harry had ever fought. He stood alone in the Chamber of Secrets, the sword of Salazar Slytherin still warm in his hand, the ashes of Voldemort still settling on the stone floor. The ancient magic hummed around him, a living presence that seemed to pulse with satisfaction. The Dark Lord was gone. The threat that had haunted Harry's entire life was finally, irrevocably ended. And yet, Harry felt nothing. No triumph, no relief. Just a vast, empty stillness that echoed through his chest like the silence of the chamber itself. He had done what he set out to do. He had destroyed Voldemort, torn down the old order, built something new from the ruins. The Serpent Council was established, the ministry was reforming, and the wizarding world was slowly healing from the wounds of war. Everything was going according to plan. But standing here, in the place where it had all begun, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He walked through the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The statue of Salazar Slytherin loomed overhead, its stone eyes seeming to follow him. Harry stopped before it, looking up at the founder's ancient face. "You knew, didn't you?" he said softly. "You knew this would happen. You knew I would come here, would find your secrets, would use them to reshape the world." The statue didn't answer. But Harry felt something shift in the magic around him, a subtle change that made his skin prickle. He reached out with his will, probing the ancient spells that protected the chamber. There was something here, something he'd missed before. A hidden compartment, sealed with magic that had been waiting for 1,000 years. Harry moved toward the base of the statue, his fingers tracing the stone. He found the seam, the faint line that marked the entrance to the hidden space. He pressed his palm against it, and the stone slid aside, revealing a small alcove. Inside, there was a single object. A box, carved from dark wood, covered in runes that seemed to writhe in the dim light. Harry reached for it, feeling the old magic surge through him as his fingers touched the surface. He opened the box. Inside, there was a letter. Yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. Harry unfolded it carefully, his heart pounding with anticipation. "My heir," the letter began, in a script that Harry recognized from Slytherin's journals. "If you are reading this, then you have done what I could not. You have defeated the darkness that threatened our world, and you have claimed the power that was rightfully yours." Harry read on, his mind racing. The letter spoke of the old magic, of the legacy that Slytherin had left behind. It spoke of a prophecy, a vision that the founder had seen 1,000 years ago, a vision of a wizard who would rise to unite the magical world, who would bridge the divisions between pureblood and muggleborn, who would bring peace to a world torn by conflict. "I saw you," Slytherin wrote. "I saw your face in my visions, though I did not know your name. I knew that you would come, that you would find my secrets, that you would use them to build a new world. And I knew that you would face a choice, the most difficult choice of all." Harry felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He didn't want to read the rest, didn't want to know what Slytherin had seen. But the words drew him in, pulled him forward against his will. "The power you have claimed is vast," the letter continued. "Vaster than you know. But with that power comes a burden, a responsibility that cannot be ignored. The old magic is not just a tool, my heir. It is a living force, one that demands balance. If you take too much, if you give too little, the scales will tip. And the consequences will be devastating." Harry read on, his hands trembling. Slytherin spoke of the nature of the old magic, of the need to maintain equilibrium between light and dark, order and chaos, creation and destruction. He spoke of a ritual, an ancient ceremony that could restore balance to the magical world. And he spoke of the price. "The ritual requires a sacrifice," Slytherin wrote. "Not of blood, not of life. Something more precious. It requires the wizard who wields the old magic to give up what they value most. Their power, their ambition, their desire to shape the world. Only by releasing that which they hold dearest can they truly restore balance." Harry stared at the letter, his mind reeling. Give up what he valued most. His power, his ambition, his vision for the world. That was everything he'd worked for, everything he'd fought for. To give it up would be to undo everything he'd accomplished. But the alternative was worse. Slytherin's words echoed in his mind: if the scales tipped too far, the consequences would be devastating. Harry had seen what happened when power was unchecked. He'd seen it in Voldemort, in the Death Eaters, in the corruption of the Ministry. He didn't want to become that. But he couldn't give up everything, could he? There had to be another way. Harry folded the letter and placed it back in the box. He stood in the chamber, the sword still in his hand, and tried to think. The Serpent Council was waiting for him. The reforms were underway, the new order taking shape. Harry had worked so hard to build this, had sacrificed so much. He couldn't just walk away. But the old magic was stirring, restless. Harry could feel it pulling at him, demanding something he didn't want to give. The scales were tipping, and he was the one who had to balance them. He left the Chamber of Secrets and walked through the castle, his steps slow and heavy. The corridors were empty, the students asleep in their beds. The war was over, and the peace was fragile, precious. He reached the astronomy tower and climbed to the top. The night sky stretched above him, vast and eternal. Harry looked up at the stars, trying to find answers in their cold light. He thought about his parents, who had died to save him. He thought about the Dursleys, who had tried to break him. He thought about his friends, his enemies, the people who had shaped him into who he was. And he thought about the future. The world he wanted to build, the legacy he wanted to leave behind. The old magic whispered in his mind, tempting him with promises of power, of glory, of everything he'd ever wanted. But Harry knew the truth now. The power was a gift, but it was also a curse. If he held on too tightly, it would consume him. He made his decision. The ritual was simple, almost anticlimactic. Harry stood in the Chamber of Secrets, the sword in his hand, and spoke the words that Slytherin had written in his letter. The old magic surged around him, wild and powerful, demanding that he give up what he valued most. Harry closed his eyes and let go. He felt the power drain from him, flowing out of his body like water from a cracked vessel. He felt his ambition fade, his desire to shape the world dimming to a faint whisper. He felt the old magic release its hold on him, leaving him empty, hollow, but somehow lighter. When he opened his eyes, the chamber was silent. The statue of Slytherin looked down at him, its stone face somehow softer than before. The sword was cold in his hand, its ancient magic dormant. Harry was no longer the most powerful wizard in the world. He was just a boy, standing in a chamber, holding a sword that no longer sang to him. But he was at peace. The Serpent Council met the next morning, and Harry told them what he'd done. There was shock, disbelief, anger. Draco accused him of throwing away everything they'd worked for. Blaise called him a fool. Theodore just watched, his eyes unreadable. I didn't throw it away, Harry said, his voice calm. I gave it up because it was the right thing to do. The old magic was too powerful, too dangerous. If I'd held on to it, I would have become what I was fighting against. But what about the reforms? Draco demanded. What about the new order? We can't do this without you. You can, Harry said. You don't need me. You have each other, and you have the vision we built together. The Serpent Council can continue without my power. It needs to. There was a long silence. Then Blaise spoke. What will you do now? Harry smiled, a sad, wistful expression. I don't know. I've spent my whole life fighting, planning, building. I've never had a chance to just live. Maybe I'll travel. Maybe I'll teach. Maybe I'll just find out who I am without the magic. The council members looked at each other. Their expressions uncertain. But one by one, they nodded. They understood. They didn't agree, but they understood. Harry left the council chamber and walked through the corridors of Hogwarts one last time. The castle was quiet, peaceful. The war was over, and the healing had begun. He stopped at the entrance to the great hall and looked inside. The tables were empty, the candles unlit. But Harry could feel the ghosts of the past, the echoes of all the meals, the celebrations, the moments of joy and sorrow that had filled this space. He was leaving now, leaving it all behind. But he was taking something with him, a memory, a lesson, a sense of who he was. The boy from the cupboard under the stairs had come so far. He had risen from nothing, had faced impossible odds, had reshaped the wizarding world. And now he was letting it all go. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. And it was the right thing. Harry walked out of Hogwarts and into the world beyond. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Harry breathed in the fresh morning air and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The Serpent Council carried on without him. The reforms continued, the new order taking shape under the guidance of Draco, Blaise, Theodore, and the others. They were different from Harry, less powerful, less ambitious, but they were committed to the vision they'd built together. The wizarding world healed slowly, painfully. But it healed. The divisions between pureblood and muggleborn began to fade. The ministry reformed itself, becoming more transparent and accountable. The old families adapted to the new reality, learning to work with those they'd once despised. And Harry watched it all from a distance. He traveled the world, learning about different cultures, different forms of magic. He taught in small schools, helped rebuild communities devastated by the war. He lived simply, quietly, without the weight of power on his shoulders. He never returned to Hogwarts. Not because he didn't want to, but because he felt that his time there was over. The castle had been his home, his sanctuary, his battlefield. But it was also a place of memories, of losses, of things he needed to leave behind. He stayed in touch with his friends, visited them when he could, wrote letters when he couldn't. Draco became a respected figure in the new ministry, his ambition channeled into constructive work. Blaise married a Ravenclaw and settled into a quiet life of scholarship. Theodore became a historian, documenting the war and the new order that had risen from its ashes. And Harry? Harry became something he'd never expected to be. He became ordinary. It was strange, at first, to live without the constant hum of magic in his veins. He'd been so used to the power, so dependent on it, that its absence felt like a phantom limb. But over time, he grew accustomed to it. He learned to appreciate the small things, a good meal, a warm fire, a conversation with a friend. He had given up his power, but he had gained something else. Peace. Harry often thought about the letter from Salazar Slytherin, about the prophecy the founder had seen. He wondered if he'd fulfilled it, if he'd truly united the magical world and brought peace to a divided people. He'd like to think he had. But it didn't matter, not really. What mattered was that he'd tried. He'd done his best. And he'd let go when he needed to. One evening, many years later, Harry stood on a hillside overlooking a small village. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. He was older now, his hair streaked with gray, his face lined with the passage of time. He had lived a good life. Not the life he'd expected, not the life he'd planned. But a good life nonetheless. The magic was still there, a faint whisper in the back of his mind. He could feel it, could almost reach out and touch it. But he didn't. He'd made his choice, and he'd stand by it. The serpent had risen. Shaken the world, and then faded away into the quiet twilight of history. And Harry, the boy who had started it all, was content to let that be his legacy. He turned away from the sunset and walked back toward the village, his steps slow and steady. The game of power was over. The Shadow War was done. And Harry Potter had finally found what he'd been looking for all along. Peace. Thank you.